Welcome, dear traveler through time, to Tudor England, to a world of magnificent palaces and terrifying dungeons, of passionate romances and brutal executions, of religious revolution and political intrigue, and to the glittering, dangerous court where one king's desires reshaped a nation and 6 women wore the crown of England, 2 of them losing their heads in the process. Tonight, as you settle into rest, we will journey through one of history's most fascinating dynasties, the Tudors, who ruled England from 1485 to 1603. We will walk the corridors of Hampton Court and the Tower of London, witness the break with Rome and the English Reformation, meet the 6 wives of Henry VIII and countless other figures who populated this extraordinary court, and explore how personal passions and political necessities intertwine to create modern England. This is not a simple tale of good versus evil, of enlightened progress or medieval barbarism. The Tudor court was a place of extraordinary complexity where Renaissance humanism flourished alongside religious persecution, where magnificent art coexisted with judicial murder, where women could wield surprising power yet faced existential vulnerability, and where decisions made in royal bedchambers echoed through centuries of English and world history. We will meet Henry VIII, not just the bloated tyrant of popular imagination, but the athletic, cultured young king who became increasingly paranoid and cruel with age. We will encounter his 6 wives: Catherine of Aragon, the dignified Spanish princess who refused to accept rejection; Anne Boleyn, the sharp-witted woman whose pursuit of queenship led to her execution; Jane Seymour, who gave Henry his longed-for son but died in the process; Anne of Cleves, who survived through pragmatism; Catherine Howard, the teenager destroyed by court intrigues; and Catherine Parr, the educated survivor who outlived the king. We will explore beyond the marriages to see the broader Tudor world: the magnificent Cardinal Wolsey's rise and fall, Thomas Cromwell's revolutionary administration and gruesome death, Thomas More's principled martyrdom, the dissolution of the monasteries that reshaped England's landscape and economy, the religious tumult that swung between Catholicism and Protestantism, and the daily life of a court where favor could elevate a family to greatness, or a misstep could lead to the scaffold. But we approach this endlessly fascinating period with balance and nuance. The Tudors were neither romantic heroes nor simple villains. Henry VIII was capable of charm and cruelty, intelligence and irrationality. His wives were neither passive victims nor modern feminists, but women navigating an extraordinarily dangerous world with varying degrees of agency, intelligence, and luck. The Tudor court produced magnificent cultural achievements and horrific violence, sophisticated politics and petty vendettas, genuine religious conviction and cynical political calculation. So breathe deeply, let your mind enter the candlelit chambers and torch-lit banquet halls of Tudor England, and prepare to explore a world where a king's great matter, his desire to divorce his first wife and marry his mistress, triggered a religious revolution, where the headsman's axe was a constant presence in political life, where courtiers composed poetry one day and faced treason charges the next, and where the decisions of one supremely self-centered monarch shaped the destiny of nations. Let us begin in 1509, when a handsome, athletic 17-year-old prince ascends the English throne full of hope and promise, with no inkling that his reign will see 6 marriages, 2 queens executed, the break with Rome, the dissolution of monasteries, religious upheaval, and the transformation of England from a medieval Catholic kingdom to an early modern Protestant state. Henry VIII, 1491–1547, is one of history's most recognizable monarchs. The image of the corpulent, bearded tyrant in magnificent robes is iconic. But this wasn't always who he was. Understanding Henry requires starting with the golden young prince who became king at 17, full of promise, vitality, and idealism. Before age, frustration, and power corrupted him into the paranoid despot of later years. Birth and unexpected inheritance. 1491–1509. Henry Tudor was born on June 28, 1491, at Greenwich Palace, the second son of Henry VII, the first Tudor king, and Elizabeth of York. He was not expected to be king. His older brother Arthur was the heir, carefully raised and educated for kingship, betrothed to Catherine of Aragon, the Spanish princess whose marriage would seal the alliance between England and Spain. Henry's childhood was therefore different from Arthur's. He was raised with his sisters Margaret and Mary. He received an excellent education. The Tudors valued learning Latin, French, theology, music, and martial skills. He was athletic and vigorous, tall, eventually over 6 feet, unusually tall for the era, strong, and excelling at jousting, hunting, and tennis. He was intended for the church, the traditional destination for second sons, and received strong religious education. In 1502, catastrophe struck the Tudor family. Arthur, Prince of Wales, died at age 15, just months after marrying Catherine of Aragon. The cause was probably the sweating sickness, a mysterious disease that periodically devastated Tudor England, or possibly tuberculosis or plague. Arthur's death transformed Henry's life. At age 10, he suddenly became heir to the throne. His education shifted toward kingship. His father, Henry VII, became extremely protective. Having lost his eldest son, he guarded his remaining heir jealously. The question of Catherine of Aragon's status became complicated. She was a widowed princess, her marriage unconsummated according to her testimony, and her future uncertain. Henry VII, the cautious, financially astute first Tudor king, kept his son close. Young Henry was rarely allowed to participate in tournaments too dangerous. He was kept at court under his father's eye. He chafed at these restrictions, longing for the freedom to prove himself. When Henry VII died in April 1509, 17-year-old Henry became King. Henry VIII of England. The Golden Prince becomes king 1509. Henry VIII's accession was greeted with joy and optimism. He was everything people hoped for in a Renaissance monarch, young and vigorous, 17 years old. Tall and athletic, about 6'2", broad-shouldered, muscular, handsome. Contemporary descriptions universally praised his appearance: golden red hair, fair complexion, well-proportioned features. Cultured and educated, fluent in Latin and French, knowledgeable about theology, accomplished musician and composer. Generous and charming in contrast to his father's parsimony. Thomas More, later executed by Henry, wrote that Henry's accession was like the beginning of spring after winter, the old king's miserly, cautious reign replaced by youthful vigor and magnificence. One of Henry's first acts was both romantic and politically astute. He married Catherine of Aragon. Catherine, 1485–1536, was the youngest daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain. Yes, the same Isabella we explored in the Queen's series. She had been in England since 1501, married to Arthur briefly, then left in limbo for 7 years while Henry VII negotiated with Spain about her status. The marriage took place in June 1509. Less than 2 months after Henry's accession, Henry's motivations were complex. Genuine affection. Catherine was 6 years older, educated, dignified, and accomplished. Political wisdom. The Spanish alliance was valuable. Chivalric idealism, rescuing the wronged princess from her difficult situation, appealed to Henry's self-image. Rebellion against his father Henry VII had considered abandoning the Spanish marriage. Henry VIII asserted his independence by proceeding. Catherine became Queen of England, crowned alongside Henry in a magnificent ceremony at Westminster Abbey. The early years, a Renaissance court, 1509–1527. The first 18 years of Henry's reign were characterized by magnificence, cultural achievement, and relative stability. The king's character in these early years: athletic prowess. Henry was obsessed with physical excellence. He excelled at jousting, participating in tournaments, often incognito, though everyone knew who the tall, athletic competitor was. He hunted constantly, sometimes exhausting his courtiers with all-day hunts. He played real tennis, an indoor racket sport, ancestor of modern tennis. He wrestled, shot archery, and engaged in various martial exercises. His physical vigor was central to his self-image as a king. Cultural accomplishments: he composed music. Several pieces attributed to him survive, including possibly Greensleeves, though this attribution is debated. He played multiple instruments: lute, virginals, organ. He wrote poetry and theological treatises. He patronized artists, musicians, and scholars. His court became a center of Renaissance culture in England. Intellectual engagement: he read theology extensively. His library was substantial. He debated with scholars and theologians. He took personal interest in religious matters. This wasn't just political calculation. Henry genuinely cared about theology. He corresponded with humanists like Erasmus. Political involvement, unlike some monarchs who left governance to ministers, Henry took active interest in policy. He attended council meetings. He reviewed documents personally. Though he relied on capable ministers Wolsey, later Cromwell, he made final decisions. But already, less attractive characteristics were emerging: egotism and narcissism. He needed constant praise and affirmation. Inability to accept criticism or contradiction. Quick temper, though in early years he controlled it better. Suspicion, he worried about loyalty and betrayal. Self-righteousness, he convinced himself his desires aligned with God's will. Cardinal Wolsey, the king's great minister. For the first 20 years of Henry's reign, Cardinal Thomas Wolsey c. 1473–1530 was the most powerful man in England, after the King Wolsey's background. Son of an Ipswich butcher, humble origins by aristocratic standards. Rose through church hierarchy through ability and ambition. Became Henry's almoner chaplain and quickly gained the king's favor. By 1515 he was Lord Chancellor, Chief Minister, and Cardinal senior church official. His power was extraordinary. He controlled patronage appointments to offices. He conducted foreign policy. He administered justice. He managed finances. He was papal legate, the Pope's representative in England, giving him authority over English church. He lived in magnificent splendor. Hampton Court Palace was Wolsey's before Henry took it. His relationship with Henry: Wolsey understood Henry's psychology. He provided the king with magnificence, success, and flattery. He handled tedious administrative work, freeing Henry for hunting and pleasure. He took blame when policies failed, protecting Henry's image. He was extraordinarily capable, a brilliant administrator and diplomat. But this dependence would prove fatal when Wolsey couldn't deliver what Henry wanted most: a male heir and freedom from Catherine of Aragon. The quest for an heir. From the beginning, Henry and Catherine's marriage was overshadowed by the succession question. The Tudor dynasty was new. Henry VII had only seized the throne in 1485, ending the Wars of the Roses. Its survival depended on a clear succession, ideally multiple male heirs. Catherine's pregnancies, she conceived multiple times between 1509 and 1518. Most ended in miscarriage or stillbirth. Several children were born alive but died within weeks or months. Only one child survived: Mary, born in 1516. The pattern: 1510 stillborn daughter, 1511 son, Duke of Cornwall, born alive. Henry was ecstatic, but the baby died after 52 days. 1513 stillborn son, 1514 stillborn son, 1516. Mary born survived to adulthood, later Queen Mary died. 1518 stillborn daughter. This was devastating by medieval understanding. Catherine had failed her primary duty. Henry desperately wanted sons. Daughters couldn't inherit easily. England had no precedent for successful female rule. As Catherine aged, she was born in 1485, so by the 1520s she was entering her 40s. Prospects for more children dimmed. Henry began to convince himself the marriage was cursed. Why the obsession with male heirs? Practical politics. Female rulers were unprecedented in England. Empress Matilda's attempt had led to civil war. A daughter would marry, potentially bringing a foreign king, or creating succession disputes. Multiple male heirs provided security. If one died, others remained. Dynastic anxiety. The Tudors were a new dynasty, only two kings, Henry VII and Henry VIII. Failure to produce heirs could mean rival claimants. Yorkist descendants still existed. The Wars of the Roses 1455–1485 were recent memory. Succession disputes meant civil war. Personal ego. Henry saw himself as a great king. How could he not produce sons? He compared himself to biblical kings who had multiple sons. Male heirs validated his masculinity and God's favor. By the mid-1520s, Henry was becoming desperate. Catherine was aging, unlikely to bear more children. Mary was their only surviving child. And Henry had noticed a young woman at court, Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn enters the scene c. 1525–1527. Anne Boleyn c. 1501–1536 was not the most beautiful woman at court, but she was the most fascinating. Her background, Born around 1501, exact date uncertain, to Thomas Boleyn, a courtier and diplomat, and Elizabeth Howard from the powerful Howard family. Spent several years at foreign courts Netherlands, France as part of various royal households. Educated, cultured, sophisticated, she spoke French fluently, played music, danced beautifully, and was accomplished in courtly arts. Returned to English court in early 1520s. Her appearance not a conventional beauty by Tudor standards, which preferred fair-haired, pale women. Dark hair and eyes unusual and striking. Slender rather than voluptuous. Possibly had a sixth fingernail or an extra finger. Growth sources differ, and hostile sources later exaggerated this into witchcraft accusations. Graceful and stylish, she set fashion trends. Her personality witty and sharp-tongued. Intelligent and well-read. Strong-willed and ambitious. Flirtatious but calculating. Proud, some said arrogant. Henry's interest in Anne probably began around 1525-1526 initially. He may have pursued her as a mistress. Henry had had mistresses before, most notably Mary Boleyn, Anne's sister. Extramarital affairs by kings were common and accepted. He expected Anne to become his mistress, but Anne refused. She wouldn't become his mistress. She demanded marriage. This was extraordinary. Refusing the king was dangerous. But Anne calculated correctly that Henry's desire would grow with denial. Henry became obsessed. His love letters to Anne survive. Anne's responses don't, but Henry's references to them suggest she was cautious and non-committal. He showered her with gifts and attention. He began to envision marrying her. This created the king's great matter, Henry's attempt to annul his marriage to Catherine and marry Anne Boleyn, a quest that would consume the late 1520s and early 1530s, destroy Cardinal Wolsey, break England from Rome, and fundamentally alter English history. The character of young Henry. Before we proceed to the great matter and its consequences, let's understand the Henry of these early years, 1509 to 1527. His virtues: genuinely cultured and educated, not just a warrior, but a Renaissance prince. Capable of charm and generosity. Physically impressive and athletic. Pious in his own way, his faith was sincere, though self-serving. Politically engaged and often shrewd. His flaws already evident: egotistical to the point of narcissism. Needed constant affirmation and praise. Unable to accept blame, always found scapegoats. Increasingly convinced his desires aligned with God's will. Capable of cruelty when thwarted. Suspicious of disloyalty, real or imagined. The psychological pattern that would characterize his reign: Henry would want something, Anne Boleyn, a male heir, religious supremacy, etc. He would convince himself it was God's will. Obstacles would be seen as opposition to God's plan. He would find theological/legal justifications for his desires. Anyone who disagreed would be disloyal or heretical. He would destroy opposition without remorse, because opposing him was opposing God. This pattern would lead to the break with Rome, the dissolution of the monasteries, the execution of 2 wives and numerous officials, and the religious turmoil that characterized his reign. But in 1527, as Henry began seriously pursuing the annulment of his marriage to Catherine, he was still the Golden King: athletic, cultured, and charming. The transformation into the bloated tyrant was still years away, though the seeds were already planted. What began as Henry VIII's desire to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon and marry Anne Boleyn became the king's great matter: a constitutional, religious, and diplomatic crisis that lasted 6 years and resulted in the English Reformation, the break with Rome, and the transformation of England from a Catholic kingdom under papal authority to an independent church under royal supremacy. Understanding this crisis requires examining theological arguments, political calculations, personal passions, and the role of extraordinary personalities who shaped events. The theological argument: Henry's case for annulment rested on biblical interpretation. Leviticus 20:21, "If a man shall take his brother's wife, it is an unclean thing, they shall be childless." Henry's argument: Catherine had been married to his brother Arthur. Therefore, his marriage to her violated biblical law. God was punishing this sin by denying him sons. The papal dispensation that had allowed the marriage granted in 1503 was invalid because the Pope couldn't dispense from divine law. Therefore, he had never been truly married to Catherine. The marriage should be annulled, declared never valid, not divorced, ending a valid marriage. Catherine's counter-argument: her marriage to Arthur had never been consummated. She was a virgin when she married Henry. Therefore, she wasn't truly Arthur's wife. Her marriage to Henry was valid. Their daughter Mary was legitimate. The Pope's dispensation was valid. Deuteronomy 25:5: If brethren dwell together, and one of them die, her husband's brother shall take her to him to wife. This verse suggested a man should marry his brother's widow, the opposite of Leviticus, complicating Henry's argument. The theological debate was genuinely complex. Henry wasn't simply fabricating arguments, but engaging with real scriptural interpretation. Medieval and Renaissance theologians had debated these passages for centuries. But underneath theology was politics and passion. Henry wanted Anne Boleyn. He wanted a male heir, which he believed Anne could provide. She was young and fertile. He had convinced himself that God wanted him to have sons, and that his marriage to Catherine was blocking this. The Pope's dilemma. Henry appealed to Pope Clement VII for an annulment under normal circumstances. This might have been granted. Popes had annulled royal marriages before. Political considerations often influenced papal decisions. The theological arguments were debatable. But circumstances were not normal. The sack of Rome 1527, imperial troops serving Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, sacked Rome, imprisoned the Pope, and controlled him for months. This catastrophe occurred just as Henry's case was developing. Catherine's nephew. Charles V was Catherine of Aragon's nephew, son of her sister Joanna. He had enormous influence over the Pope, and opposed the annulment. It would humiliate his aunt and bastardize his cousin Mary. Political pressure. Charles V could make life very difficult for the Pope if he granted Henry's annulment. Henry could pressure the Pope too, but England was less powerful than the Holy Roman Empire. The Pope's strategy was delay. He appointed Cardinal Wolsey and Cardinal Campeggio to hear the case in England. He gave vague, non-committal responses. He hoped the situation would resolve itself. Perhaps Catherine would die, or Henry would tire of Anne, or some compromise could be found. This delay drove Henry to frustration, and eventually to radical action. The Blackfriars Trial 1529. In 1529, a legatine court convened at Blackfriars in London to hear Henry's case. The proceedings Cardinals Wolsey and Campeggio presided. Henry and Catherine both appeared. Lawyers argued the theological and legal points. Catherine's dramatic moment: she knelt before Henry, begging him to remember their years together. She proclaimed her virginity at their marriage. She asserted Mary's legitimacy. She then left the court, and refused to return, appealing directly to the Pope in Rome. This direct appeal to Rome removed the case from English jurisdiction, infuriating Henry. Campeggio adjourned the court, ostensibly for summer recess, but actually to prevent a judgment on papal orders. The case would drag on for years, but the Blackfriars trial was the last time it would be heard under papal authority. The fall of Wolsey. Cardinal Wolsey had served Henry brilliantly for 20 years, but he couldn't deliver the annulment. Henry blamed Wolsey. Wolsey had promised to secure the annulment. His failure was seen as incompetence or disloyalty. Anne Boleyn, who hated Wolsey, poisoned Henry against him. In October 1529, Wolsey was stripped of the Lord Chancellorship and charged with premunire, exercising papal authority in England, technically illegal though previously ignored. Wolsey was arrested in November 1530 on charges of treason, but died en route to London, possibly from natural causes, possibly suicide. His famous last words, according to his gentleman usher George Cavendish: "If I had served God as diligently as I have done the king, he would not have given me over in my gray hairs." Wolsey's fall demonstrated that no one, however powerful or long-serving, was safe if they failed to deliver what Henry wanted. Thomas Cromwell and the Henrician Reformation. Into Wolsey's place stepped Thomas Cromwell c. 1485-1540, who would engineer the solution to Henry's great matter. Cromwell's background, born to a Putney blacksmith, rose through ability, ruthlessness, and intelligence. Served as Wolsey's secretary and administrator. After Wolsey's fall, entered Henry's service. Cromwell's solution was radical. Rather than convincing the Pope to grant the annulment, England would simply reject papal authority. Henry would be declared supreme head of the Church in England. English courts would decide the annulment without papal approval. Parliament would pass laws severing ties with Rome. The Church of England would be independent. This required parliamentary legislation. Cromwell was a genius at parliamentary management. Theological justification scholars were found to argue for royal supremacy. Neutralizing opposition through persuasion, intimidation, or execution. Managing public opinion through propaganda and controlled information. The Reformation Parliament 1529-1536. Cromwell used Parliament to revolutionize England's relationship with Rome. Key Legislation Act in Restraint of Appeals 1533 declared that England was an empire self-sufficient jurisdiction. Appeals to Rome in legal cases, including marriage annulments, were forbidden. This allowed Henry's annulment to be decided in England. Act of Supremacy 1534 declared Henry VIII supreme head of the Church of England. Rejected papal authority completely. Made it treason to deny royal supremacy. Treason Act 1534 expanded definition of treason to include words as well as deeds. Denying royal supremacy or calling the king a heretic was treason punishable by death. Acts of Succession. Various acts 1534, 1536, 1544 declared which children were legitimate and could inherit. Required oaths recognizing royal supremacy and the legitimacy of Henry's current marriage. These laws fundamentally transformed England. The Pope's authority was abolished. The king became head of the church. English courts had final authority. No appeals to Rome. Treason law was weaponized against dissent. The marriage to Anne Boleyn 1533. Even before the annulment was legally finalized, Henry married Anne. Anne became pregnant in late 1532. Henry believed the child would be the longed-for son. They married secretly in January 1533 to legitimize the coming child. In May 1533, Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, appointed by Henry, convened a court at Dunstable and declared Henry's marriage to Catherine was null and void. It had never been valid. Catherine was merely Princess Dowager Arthur's widow, not queen. In June 1533, Anne was crowned Queen of England in a magnificent ceremony. On September 7, 1533, Anne gave birth. But the child was a daughter. Elizabeth, later Elizabeth I. Henry, was devastated. All this upheaval, and still no son. But he accepted Elizabeth and continued to hope Anne would bear sons. Catherine of Aragon's fate. Catherine refused to accept the annulment. She was moved to increasingly uncomfortable residences, Ampthill, Kimbolton, separated from her daughter Mary, and given a reduced household. She insisted on her title as queen and her daughter's legitimacy. She refused to acknowledge the title Princess Dowager. She wrote to the Pope, Charles V., and others seeking support. She maintained dignity despite humiliation. She died in January 1536 at Kimbolton Castle, possibly of cancer. She was 50 years old. Her last letter to Henry asked him to care for their daughter Mary, and asserted her love for him, a dignified end to a tragic story. Henry wore yellow, not mourning black, when informed of her death. Whether from genuine relief or performative callousness is debated. Opposition and martyrs. Not everyone accepted the break with Rome. Sir Thomas More 1478-1535, brilliant lawyer, humanist scholar, and author. Utopia. Succeeded Wolsey as Lord Chancellor 1529. Opposed Henry's annulment and break with Rome on principle. Resigned as Chancellor 1532 rather than support the king's policies. Refused to swear the oath of supremacy recognizing Henry as supreme head of the church. Was tried for treason and executed in July 1535. His last words: "I die the king's good servant, but God's first." John Fisher 1469-1535, Bishop of Rochester, theologian and scholar. Catherine of Aragon's supporter and advisor. Refused to accept royal supremacy. Created a cardinal by the Pope, infuriating Henry. Executed in June 1535. The Carthusian monks. Several Carthusian monasteries refused to accept royal supremacy. Monks were executed, hanged, drawn, and quartered in 1535. Their deaths were particularly brutal, designed to terrorize others into compliance. These martyrs, canonized by the Catholic Church in the 20th century, demonstrated that some preferred death to accepting what they saw as heresy and tyranny. But most complied. Fear of execution, desire for preferment, genuine belief in royal supremacy, or simple pragmatism led most clergy and laypeople to accept the new order. The impact of the break with Rome. The English Reformation Henrician phase, 1529 in 1547, had profound consequences. Religious England was no longer part of the Catholic Church under papal authority. The Church of England was established, though initially, doctrine remained largely Catholic except for papal supremacy. Religious uniformity was enforced through law and violence. Political royal power increased enormously. The king now controlled both state and church. Parliament's role grew. Legislation had accomplished the Reformation. The nature of treason expanded. Words became treasonous. Economic will explore this more fully later. Dissolution of the monasteries transferred vast wealth to the crown. Land redistribution created new gentry class. Economic and social disruption. Cultural English identity began shifting away from Catholic European identity. Religious art and architecture were destroyed or altered. Intellectual life was reshaped. International England's relationship with Catholic Europe became antagonistic. Alliance patterns shifted. England was threatened with papal-sponsored invasion, though this never materialized during Henry's reign. The Great Matters Resolution. By 1533, Henry had achieved his goals. He was married to Anne Boleyn. He was supreme head of the Church of England. Catherine was legally no longer his wife. Opposition had been crushed or intimidated into silence. But the costs were high. England was divided religiously. Many died for their convictions. The monasteries will explore this would be destroyed. The break with Rome was irrevocable. And the bitter irony, Anne Boleyn gave Henry a daughter, not the son he desperately wanted. Within 3 years, she would be dead, executed on Henry's orders, and he would be looking for a third wife. The Great Matter began as one king's desire to remarry, but became a constitutional and religious revolution that reshaped England and influenced world history. The English Reformation had consequences reaching far beyond Henry's personal desires. Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. The famous mnemonic for remembering the fates of Henry VIII, 6 wives, captures their endings but obscures their lives. These were not merely victims but complex women who navigated an extraordinarily dangerous world with varying degrees of agency, intelligence, and luck. We've already met Catherine of Aragon, the first wife, divorced and displaced. Now let's explore the other 5 women who wore England's crown, focusing particularly on Anne Boleyn, whose rise and fall was the most dramatic. Anne Boleyn, c. 1501-1536, the queen who changed England. Anne Boleyn is Tudor England's most controversial and fascinating figure, praised as a Protestant martyr, condemned as a scheming adulteress, and analyzed as a woman who almost succeeded in the dangerous game of Tudor politics. The rise 1525-1533. We've already seen how Anne caught Henry's attention and refused to become his mistress, insisting on marriage. But her rise to power involved more than simple seduction. Political acumen. Anne aligned with the religious reform movement, evangelicals who wanted church reform. She patronized reformist preachers and scholars. She gave Henry books arguing for royal supremacy over the Pope. She positioned herself as the solution to the succession crisis. Young, fertile, capable of bearing sons. Court faction. Her family, Boleyns and Howards, gained power as she rose. She built a network of supporters. She influenced patronage and appointments. She was hated by Catherine's supporters and religious conservatives. Cultural influence. She set fashion trends. She promoted music and arts. She maintained a sophisticated household. She embodied Renaissance court culture. The years 1527-1533 saw her in an extraordinary position, not yet queen but treated as such. Wielding influence over Henry. Making enemies, especially Catherine's supporters. Waiting for the annulment that seemed endlessly delayed. Queen Consort 1533-1536. Her coronation June 1, 1533, was magnificent but controversial. Elaborate pageantry and ceremony. But London crowds were reportedly cool. Catherine remained popular. Protestant symbolism in the decorations. Her queenship was active. She intervened in patronage and politics. She promoted religious reform. She maintained a grand household. She advocated for the poor, distributing alms. She had a sharp tongue and made enemies at court. The succession crisis continued. Elizabeth was born September 1533, a daughter, not the desired son. Anne suffered a miscarriage in 1534. She became pregnant again but miscarried in January 1536, reportedly a male fetus. This was devastating. Henry's patience was exhausted. Henry's disillusionment. By 1536, Henry was tiring of Anne. She hadn't produced a son, the whole point of the annulment and break with Rome. Her sharp wit and independence irritated him, whereas Catherine had been patient and deferential. He was interested in Jane Seymour, one of Anne's ladies-in-waiting. He convinced himself that the marriage was cursed, just as he'd convinced himself about Catherine. The fall, May 1536. Anne's fall was swift and brutal. May 2, 1536. Anne was arrested at Greenwich and taken to the Tower of London. The charges: adultery with 5 men, including her own brother, George Boleyn, Lord Rochford. Treason. Adultery by a queen was treason as it threatened the succession. Plotting the king's death. The accused men: Mark Smeaton, a musician, extracted a confession under torture. Sir Henry Norris, groom of the stool, one of Henry's closest servants. Sir Francis Weston, a courtier. William Brereton, a courtier. George Boleyn, Lord Rochford, Anne's brother. The evidence was extremely thin. Smeaton's tortured confession. Circumstantial evidence: Anne was alone with men, courtly flirtation was misinterpreted, etc. No credible witnesses to actual adultery. The charge of incest with her brother was particularly absurd. Modern historians almost universally agree the charges were false. The evidence doesn't stand scrutiny. The timing convenient for Henry, who wanted to remarry. The nature of the charges designed to utterly destroy Anne's reputation. Thomas Cromwell orchestrated the case, probably at Henry's direction, but Anne's sharp wit and indiscretions gave plausible cover. She had joked and flirted with courtiers. She had said imprudent things. In the tense, suspicious atmosphere of Henry's court, this was twisted into evidence. The trial: the 5 men were tried on May 12. All but Smeaton pleaded not guilty. All were convicted and sentenced to death. Anne and George Boleyn were tried separately as nobles. They got separate trials. Anne defended herself eloquently but was convicted. The executions: the 5 men were executed on May 17, beheaded on Tower Hill. A slight mercy: they had been sentenced to hanging, drawing, and quartering, but Henry commuted this. Anne was executed on May 19, 1536. Anne's execution was unprecedented. She was the first English queen to be executed. The method, beheading by a French swordsman, imported from Calais, considered more expert and merciful than an axe. Her last speech, traditional at executions, she praised Henry a gentle and sovereign lord. She didn't proclaim innocence, probably because this might endanger her daughter Elizabeth. She commended her soul to God. She asked the people to pray for her. She was beheaded with a single stroke. The swordsman was indeed skilled. Her body was placed in an arrow chest. No proper coffin had been prepared, suggesting the execution was rushed and buried in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula within the tower. Anne's legacy: her daughter became Queen Elizabeth I, one of England's greatest monarchs, ruling for 45 years, 1558-1603. The religious impact: Anne had promoted religious reform. Her fall didn't reverse the Reformation. Henry remained supreme head. Protestant historians later portrayed her as a martyr for their cause. Historical debate: was she a victim of judicial murder? Almost certainly yes. Was she ambitious and calculating? Yes, but this doesn't justify her execution. Did she commit adultery? Almost certainly not. The evidence is too thin and politically convenient. Was she a good queen? She was active and capable, but made enemies and failed to produce a male heir. Jane Seymour, c. 1508-1537, the queen who gave Henry his son. Jane Seymour was everything Anne Boleyn was not. Her background: born around 1508 to a respectable, but not particularly prominent gentry family. Served as lady-in-waiting to both Catherine and Anne. Plain in appearance, contemporary descriptions are lukewarm, fair but not beautiful. Quiet, modest, and conventional. Henry's courtship began while Anne was still alive by early 1536. Jane refused to become his mistress, learning from Anne's example. Henry's interest accelerated Anne's fall. The marriage: they married on May 30, 1536, 11 days after Anne's execution. The indecent haste shocked even by Tudor standards. Jane's motto was bound to obey and serve, emphasizing her submissiveness contrast to Anne's independence. Her queenship brief, May 1536, October 1537. She tried to reconcile Henry with his daughter Mary from Catherine. She promoted religious conservatism, opposing Protestant reforms. She was careful to avoid Anne's mistakes: no political meddling, no sharp wit. The longed-for son Jane became pregnant in early 1537. On October 12, 1537, after a difficult labor lasting several days, she gave birth to a son Edward, later Edward VI. Henry was ecstatic: finally, a legitimate male heir. Her death: Jane developed puerperal fever, childbed fever, probably from infection. She died on October 24, 1537, 12 days after giving birth. Henry genuinely mourned her more than any other wife. He was buried beside her at Windsor Castle. She was the only wife he chose to be buried with. Her legacy: she gave Henry his son. She's often portrayed sympathetically, the good, obedient wife. But we know little of her personality. Sources are thin. She was lucky to die before Henry could tire of her. Anne of Cleves, 1515–1557, the queen who got away. Anne of Cleves's brief marriage to Henry is often played for comedy: the ugly wife Henry rejected. But she was actually shrewd and survived quite comfortably. The background: daughter of the Duke of Cleves, a German Protestant state. The marriage was arranged for political reasons: alliance with Protestant German princes against Catholic powers. Thomas Cromwell engineered the match. The courtship: Henry relied on reports and a portrait by Hans Holbein, the court painter. Holbein's portrait was flattering, as portraits of marriageable royalty always were. Henry agreed to the marriage based on the portrait and political considerations. The first meeting, December 1539. Henry went to Rochester to see Anne before the formal greeting. He was reportedly horrified by her appearance. She didn't match Holbein's idealized portrait. He called her a Flanders mare, a fat horse, though this is probably apocryphal. But politically, he was trapped. The alliance was too important to break off immediately. The wedding, January 6, 1540. Henry went through with it. But he reportedly told Cromwell he couldn't consummate the marriage, finding Anne physically unattractive. The annulment, July 1540. After 6 months, Henry sought an annulment. Grounds: non-consummation and a alleged prior betrothal. Anne had been previously engaged. Anne agreed immediately and cooperatively, very wise. The marriage was annulled. Anne's settlement: she was given the title king's beloved sister. She received a generous income and several estates. She remained in England, living comfortably. She was invited to court for occasions. She outlived Henry and all his other wives, dying in 1557. Her wisdom: she cooperated with the annulment, not contesting like Catherine. She remained on good terms with Henry. She lived quietly and comfortably. She was the luckiest of Henry's wives, escaping marriage with wealth and freedom. Thomas Cromwell's fall: the Anne of Cleves debacle contributed to Cromwell's downfall. He had engineered a marriage Henry hated. Combined with other political missteps and enemies' machinations, Cromwell was arrested in June 1540. He was executed in July 1540, beheaded on Tower Hill. The same day, Henry married Catherine Howard. Catherine Howard, c. 1521–1542, the teenager who lost her head. Catherine Howard was the youngest and least mature of Henry's wives, a teenager whose indiscretions led to her execution. Her background: born around 1521, exact date uncertain, to a minor branch of the powerful Howard family. Raised in the household of her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. The Duchess's household was lax. Young people had considerable freedom. Catherine had romantic relationships before marriage, not unusual for young noblewomen, but dangerous given her later position. Premarital relationships: Henry Manox, her music teacher, probably sexual, but possibly just flirtation. Francis Derryham, a gentleman in the Duchess's household, they had a sexual relationship, and may have considered themselves informally engaged. These relationships would later be used as evidence against her. The marriage to Henry: she caught Henry's eye in 1540. She was lady-in-waiting to Anne of Cleves. Henry was in his late 40s, obese, and had a painful ulcerated leg. Catherine was about 19, pretty, vivacious, and charming. They married on July 28, 1540, the same day Cromwell was executed. Henry called her his rose without a thorn. Her queenship: she was young and frivolous. She loved clothes, jewels, and dancing. She was generous, giving gifts to favorites. She interceded for prisoners, including some condemned for religious reasons. The fall November 1541, Archbishop Cranmer received information about Catherine's premarital relationships. John Lascelles, a Protestant reformer, informed Cranmer. Lascelles's sister, Mary Hall, had been in the Dowager Duchess's household and knew about Dereham and Manox. The Howards were a conservative Catholic family. Protestants had reasons to want to destroy them. The investigation. Henry was initially disbelieving. He was besotted with Catherine. But interrogations of servants and others confirmed the premarital relationships. Then more devastating information emerged. Catherine had apparently resumed a relationship with Thomas Culpeper, a gentleman of the Privy Chamber, after marriage. Thomas Culpeper, young, handsome courtier. He and Catherine had secret meetings. Jane Boleyn, Lady Rochford, widow of Anne Boleyn's brother, serving as Catherine's lady-in-waiting, facilitated these meetings. Whether the relationship was consummated is unclear. Catherine and Culpeper both denied intercourse, but they admitted romantic involvement. The charges, premarital sexual relationships, which given her later queenship, could be seen as deceiving the king, adultery with Culpeper, treason, intent to commit adultery, also treason. The executions. Francis Dereham and Thomas Culpeper were executed on December 10, 1541, hanged, drawn, and quartered. Parliament passed a bill of attainder conviction without trial against Catherine. Catherine and Jane Boleyn were executed on February 13, 1542. Both were beheaded on Tower Green within the Tower, more private than public executions. Catherine's last night, she reportedly asked for the block to be brought to her room, so she could practice laying her head on it. Whether this story is true or later invention is uncertain. Her legacy: she was young, foolish, and ill-prepared for queenship. Her premarital relationships might have been overlooked if she hadn't continued indiscretions. She was almost certainly guilty of some level of misconduct, unlike Anne Boleyn. But execution was extreme. She was a teenager, destroyed by court intrigue and her own imprudence. Catherine Parr, 1512-1548, the survivor. Catherine Parr was the last and arguably the most remarkable of Henry's wives. Her background: born in 1512 to a gentry family. Well-educated, unusual for women, she knew Latin, French, and Italian. Married twice before Henry, both husbands died, leaving her a wealthy widow. Mature, 31 when she married Henry, experienced and intelligent. The marriage: July 12, 1543. Catherine was courted by Thomas Seymour, brother of Jane Seymour, uncle of Prince Edward. She was interested in Seymour but couldn't refuse Henry. Henry was 52, increasingly ill, and difficult. The marriage was partly political. Her conservative religious views were useful, and partly personal. Henry wanted a companion and nurse. Her queenship: she served as regent while Henry campaigned in France, 1544, demonstrating her capability. She reconciled Henry with his daughters Mary and Elizabeth, getting them restored to the succession. She promoted education for the royal children. She was the first English queen to publish under her own name devotional works. She managed Henry's difficult personality skillfully. Near disaster, 1546, Catherine's religious views evolved toward Protestantism. She discussed theology with Henry, unusual and potentially dangerous. Conservative enemies convinced Henry she was becoming heretical. A warrant was issued for her arrest. Catherine discovered the plot, went to Henry, and submitted to his authority. Henry forgave her, and the plot collapsed. Survival: she outlived Henry. He died January 28, 1547. She quickly married Thomas Seymour, the man she'd wanted to marry before. She became pregnant at age 35. She died of puerperal fever on September 5, 1548, days after giving birth to a daughter. She outlived Henry by only 18 months but died of natural causes, not execution. Her legacy: most educated and intellectual of Henry's wives. Her published works were significant. She reunited the royal family. She helped shape Prince Edward's education. The collective experience, looking at all 6 wives together, reveals patterns. None had simple lives. Even the survivors faced danger and difficulty. Political pawns: they were married for dynastic/political reasons, but personal compatibility mattered too. The succession imperative: Henry's obsession with male heirs destroyed 2 wives and drove his marital decisions. Intelligence and submission wives, who were too independent Anne Boleyn or too foolish Catherine Howard, were executed. Those who were intelligent but submissive Catherine Parr or cooperative Anne of Cleves, Jane Seymour, survived. Historical memory, they're often reduced to their fates, but they were complex women who lived full lives, not just victims or villains. Here we pause in our journey through Tudor England. We have witnessed Henry VIII golden youth transform into obsessive tyranny, seen the break with Rome reshape England's religious and political landscape, and met the 6 women who married the king, each navigating the treacherous waters of Henry's court with varying success, 2 losing their heads, 1 dying in childbed, and 3 surviving through cooperation, wisdom, or luck. As you drift towards sleep, imagine the Tudor court, magnificent banquets in Hampton Court's Great Hall, whispered conversations in torch-lit corridors, the constant awareness of the king's favor or displeasure, the sound of footsteps approaching one's chambers that could mean elevation or arrest, and the shadow of the Tower of London where queens and ministers alike could end their days. When we continue, we will explore the dissolution of the monasteries and the transformation of English society, the fates of Henry's children and the succession struggles, the daily life of the Tudor court, and the cultural achievements and brutal realities of an age that was both Renaissance splendor and medieval cruelty. We will meet more extraordinary figures who populated this dramatic era and see how Henry's reign set the stage for Elizabeth I's golden age. But for now, rest. The Tudor palaces stand in various states of preservation across England. The portraits gaze down from museum walls, and the memory of a king and his 6 wives continues to fascinate half a millennium after their deaths. Between 1536 and 1541, Henry VIII and Thomas Cromwell executed one of history's most dramatic transfers of wealth and power, the dissolution of England's monasteries, abbeys, priories, and convents. This systematic destruction of religious houses fundamentally transformed English society, landscape, economy, and culture. It was justified as religious reform but motivated by greed, resulting in one of the greatest acts of state-sponsored plunder in English history. Understanding the dissolution requires examining the monasteries themselves, the motivations behind their destruction, the process of dissolution, the resistance it provoked, and the profound consequences that echo through English history to the present day. The monastic landscape of pre-Reformation England. Before the dissolution, monasteries dominated England's religious, economic, and social landscape. The numbers, approximately 800–900 religious houses across England and Wales. These included monasteries, monks, convents, nuns, friaries, mendicant orders, and other religious institutions. They ranged from tiny rural priories with a handful of religious to great abbeys like Glastonbury, Westminster, and fountains with hundreds of residents. The religious orders, Benedictines, black monks, the oldest and most traditional order, followed the rule of Saint Benedict 6th century. Major abbeys like Westminster, St. Albans, and Glastonbury, often wealthy and influential. Cistercians, white monks, Reformed Benedictines, emphasizing simplicity and manual labor. Fountains Abbey, Revolks, and others in northern England owned vast estates, especially sheep farming lands, often located in remote, beautiful locations. Augustinians, black canons, followed the rule of St. Augustine, served parish churches and communities, more engaged with secular society than cloistered monks. Carthusians, extremely strict contemplative order, individual cells, silence, prayer, and fasting. Small communities but highly respected for sanctity, would provide some of Henry's most principled opponents. Friars, Franciscans, Dominicans, Carmelites, Augustinians, mendicant begging orders, lived in urban friaries, preached, heard confessions, and served communities. Generally poorer than monastic orders. Nuns, various orders, Benedictine, Cistercian, and others. Fewer and generally smaller than male houses. Provided respectable retirement for noble women and widows. Ran schools and hospitals. The economic power, monasteries controlled enormous wealth, land ownership, perhaps 25–30% of England's cultivated land. Monasteries were often the largest landowners in their regions. Rents from tenants provided steady income. Agriculture and industry, sheep farming, wool, was England's major export. Mining, some monasteries owned mines. fisheries, mills, and other enterprises, employed thousands as laborers and servants. Total wealth. Estimates suggest monasteries held wealth equivalent to £200,000 annual income, enormous by 16th century standards, compared to royal revenue of about £150,000. Individual great abbeys were as wealthy as earls or bishops. Even small priories had valuable lands and possessions. The social functions. Monasteries weren't just religious institutions. Hospitality provided accommodation for travelers, maintained guest houses, medieval hotels. The wealthy and poor alike could find lodging. Charity distributed alms to the poor, fed the hungry at abbey gates, provided basic social welfare. Healthcare. Monastery infirmaries treated the sick. Monks with medical knowledge served as physicians. Some hospitals were attached to monasteries. Education. Monastic schools educated boys. Monasteries preserved and copied manuscripts. Some monks were scholars and teachers. Cultural preservation. Monastery libraries held books and manuscripts. Scriptoria copied religious and classical texts. Architectural and artistic patronage. But problems existed too: wealth and worldliness. Some monasteries were very wealthy and their monks lived comfortably, contradicting monastic poverty vows. Abbots behaved like secular lords. Discipline had relaxed in many houses. Corruption real and alleged. Some monks violated chastity vows. Some abbots mismanaged finances. Standards varied widely. Some houses were devout and well-run, others lax. Protestant critique. Reformers saw monasticism as unbiblical, not mentioned in Scripture. Criticized prayers for the dead, veneration of relics, and other practices. Viewed monastic wealth as exploiting the poor. Political independence. Monasteries held land directly from the king or pope. Abbots sat in Parliament's House of Lords. They represented potential rival power centers. The motivations for dissolution. Henry VIII and Thomas Cromwell had multiple reasons for destroying the monasteries': financial greed. The primary motive was almost certainly money. Henry had expensive tastes, building palaces, war, magnificent court. Royal finances were often strained. Monastic wealth was irresistible. Seizing it would make Henry the richest king in English history. Religious justification. Monasticism was attacked by Protestant reformers. Henry could claim he was purifying the church. Cromwell and reformers saw monasteries as centers of Catholic superstition. But Henry himself remained theologically conservative on many issues. This was Plunder dressed as reform. Political control. Monasteries held extensive lands and had political influence. Dissolution would make the crown the overwhelmingly dominant landowner. It would destroy potential centers of opposition. Loyal followers could be rewarded with monastic lands, binding them to the regime. Removing papal influence. Many monasteries had connections to Rome. Some orders reported to foreign superiors. Dissolution severed these ties. It completed the break with Rome by eliminating Catholic institutions. The Valor Ecclesiasticus 1535. The first step was assessment. Cromwell commissioned a comprehensive survey of all religious houses. Royal commissioners visited every monastery, priory, and friary. They recorded wealth, income, and property. They investigated abuses, real or manufactured. The survey provided both inventory for confiscation and propaganda ammunition. The Comprita commissioners' reports included allegations of misconduct. Sexual misconduct, financial corruption, and lax discipline were highlighted. These reports were certainly exaggerated and selectively presented, but they provided justification for dissolution. Modern historians debate the report's accuracy. Some monasteries had genuine problems, but the commissioners were biased, seeking to justify dissolution. Reports emphasized scandals and ignored well-run houses. The investigations were rushed and superficial. The First Act of Dissolution 1536. Parliament passed the First Dissolution Act in 1536. The targets monasteries with income under £200 per year, smaller houses, about 300 smaller monasteries, priories, and convents. The justification was that smaller houses were more corrupt. In reality, they were easier targets, less powerful, fewer defenders. The process: royal commissioners arrived at each house. They inventoried all possessions, land, buildings, plate, jewels, livestock, everything. Monks and nuns were offered pensions or transfer to larger houses. Buildings were stripped of valuable materials. Lead from roofs was melted down. Lead roofing was extremely valuable. Bells and metal objects were taken. Buildings were often demolished or left to decay. The resistance, some monks resisted, but most accepted pensions and left peacefully. The proceeds, lands and movable wealth went to the Court of Augmentations, a new Treasury Department Cromwell created to manage confiscated property. The Pilgrimage of Grace 1536. The dissolution of smaller monasteries helped trigger the most serious rebellion of Henry's reign. The Pilgrimage of Grace was a massive uprising in northern England, October 1536, February 1537. The causes: dissolution of monasteries, removing beloved local institutions. Religious changes break with Rome, Protestant reforms. Economic grievances, enclosures, rents, taxes. Fear of further changes. Loyalty to the old religion. The scale: perhaps 30,000, 40,000 rebels. Led by Robert Aske, a Yorkshire lawyer, and other gentry. Included nobles, clergy, and commoners. Controlled most of northern England. The rebels' demands: restore the monasteries. Remove heretical bishops and evil councillors. Cromwell. Return to Catholic practices. Address economic grievances. Henry's response: initially, he negotiated the rebels' forces outnumbered his. The Duke of Norfolk, representing Henry, promised pardons and consideration of grievances. The rebels dispersed, believing they'd won concessions. The betrayal: once the rebels dispersed, Henry broke his promises. He declared the leaders traitors. Brutal reprisals followed, perhaps 200-300 executed. Robert Aske was hanged in chains at York. The abbots of some monasteries who had supported the rebellion were executed. The Pilgrimage of Grace's failure demonstrated Henry's ruthlessness. Promises meant nothing. The regime's military power: once the rebels dispersed, they couldn't reorganize. That opposition to the Reformation was widespread, but could be crushed. The Second Wave 1538-1540. After crushing the Pilgrimage of Grace, Cromwell moved against the larger monasteries. The voluntary surrenders: abbots were persuaded to surrender their houses voluntarily. Persuasion included threats, pressure, and occasionally rewards. Most abbots complied. Refusal meant treason charges. Houses were surrendered to the crown with all possessions. The resistant houses: Glastonbury Abbey, one of England's oldest and richest abbeys. Abbot Richard Whiting, an old man, refused to surrender. He was arrested, tried for treason, and convicted on dubious evidence. He was hanged, drawn, and quartered on Glastonbury Tor, the hill overlooking the abbey, in November 1539. His head was displayed on the abbey gate. The abbey was thoroughly plundered. Reading Abbey Abbot Hugh Cook Farringdon refused surrender. He was executed in November 1539. The abbey was destroyed. Colchester Abbey Abbot John Betch resisted. He was executed in December 1539. These executions sent a clear message: resistance meant death. The friaries: in 1538-1539, the mendicant friaries, Franciscans, Dominicans, etc., were also dissolved. They were generally poorer than monasteries but numerous. Urban friaries were closed, their property confiscated. By 1540, every monastery, abbey, priory, friary, and convent in England and Wales had been dissolved. An institution that had existed for nearly 1,000 years was utterly destroyed in less than 5 years. The fate of the monks and nuns. What happened to the religious who lost their homes? Pensions: most monks and nuns received pensions. The amounts varied. Abbots and priors got more, ordinary monks less. Pensions were often adequate for modest living. They were paid regularly, at least initially. Finding new roles: some former monks became parish priests. Some found employment as tutors, secretaries, or administrators. Some returned to family. Former nuns often returned to families or remarried. The adjustments: for those who had entered religious life young, the adjustment was difficult. They had to learn to live in secular society. Some adapted well, others struggled. Women faced particular challenges: limited options for independent living. The destruction and plunder buildings lead was stripped from roofs, leaving buildings to decay. Stone was often taken for building material. Some buildings were demolished completely. Some were converted to private houses like Lacock Abbey. Some became ruins: Fountains Abbey, Revolx, Tintern. Treasures: gold and silver plate was melted down. Jewels were taken. Valuable textiles were confiscated. Bells were removed and sold or melted. Everything of value was seized. Libraries: the destruction of monastic libraries was a cultural catastrophe. Thousands of medieval manuscripts were destroyed. Some were saved by collectors like Matthew Parker, later Archbishop of Canterbury. But countless irreplaceable books were lost. Some were used as scrap. Accounts tell of manuscripts used to wrap groceries or as kindling. Art and architecture. Stained glass was smashed. Wall paintings were whitewashed. Sculptures were destroyed or defaced. The artistic loss was incalculable. The distribution of monastic lands. The confiscated lands didn't remain with the crown long. Financial pressure. Despite the enormous wealth seized, Henry spent it quickly. Wars with France and Scotland were expensive. Court extravagance continued. By the 1540s, Henry was selling monastic lands. The beneficiaries, the aristocracy, great nobles, received grants of former monastic lands. This bound them to the Reformation. They profited from it. They had vested interest in preventing Catholic restoration, which would reclaim the lands. The gentry, lesser landowners, bought lands at favorable terms. Many families rose to prominence through monastic lands. A new class of prosperous gentry emerged. Court favorites, courtiers who pleased Henry, received land grants. Royal servants were rewarded. This created loyalty to the crown and regime. Not the poor. Despite some rhetoric about using monastic wealth for social benefit, little went to the poor. Hospitals and schools that monasteries had supported were often not replaced. Charitable distribution decreased. The long-term consequences. By the 1550s, most monastic land was in private hands. This created a class of landowners with a stake in preventing Catholic restoration. Increased gentry power. Changed agricultural patterns. A new landscape of country houses built on monastic lands. The social and economic consequences. The dissolution had profound effects on English society's social welfare. Monasteries had provided charity, hospitality, and basic social services. These functions largely disappeared. No systematic replacement was created. The poor suffered. Employment. Monasteries had employed thousands of servants, laborers, craftsmen. These jobs disappeared. Some found new employment, many didn't. Economic dislocation in areas dependent on monasteries. Education. Monastic schools closed. Some were replaced. Cathedral schools, grammar schools. But many boys lost educational opportunities. The wealthy could afford tutors, the poor couldn't. The landscape, ruins dotted the countryside. Many remain today: fountains, revolts, tintern, etc. Country houses were built on monastic sites. The physical appearance of England changed permanently. Religious life. Contemplative religious life ended in England. No monasteries or convents until the 19th century. Religious vocation took different forms: parish ministry, private devotion. Cultural impact. The destruction of libraries and art was irreplaceable. A connection to the medieval past was severed. English culture shifted away from Catholic devotional life. Economic redistribution. Wealth moved from the church to the crown and then to landowners. This strengthened the landowning class. It contributed to the enclosure movement and agricultural capitalism. The ideological justification. How did Henry and Cromwell justify this plunder? The propaganda. Monasteries were portrayed as corrupt, lazy, and immoral. Monks were accused of vice and superstition. Monastic wealth was called ill-gotten, extracted from the poor through false relics and prayers. Dissolution was presented as purifying the church. The religious arguments. Monasticism was unbiblical Protestant view. Prayers for the dead were superstitious. Veneration of relics was idolatry. True religion was about faith, not monastic rituals. The practical arguments. Monastic wealth could be used for better purposes. Schools and hospitals could be founded, though few were. The crown could use the money for defense and governance. The reality. The primary motive was greed. Religious justification was window dressing. The destruction of libraries and art shows it wasn't about reform but confiscation. The historical verdict. Modern historians recognize the dissolution as a catastrophic cultural loss. Irreplaceable manuscripts, art, and architecture destroyed. 1,000 years of religious and cultural heritage eliminated. Economically transformative. The greatest transfer of land ownership since the Norman conquest. Created new landowning class with vested interest in Protestantism. Changed English society permanently. Religiously divisive. Eliminated Catholic institutions. Made restoration of Catholicism much harder. Too many had profited from dissolution. Contributed to England's Protestant identity. Politically effective. From Henry's perspective, enriched the crown temporarily, removed potential opposition centers, bound the aristocracy and gentry to the regime through shared guilt/profit. Morally indefensible, the scale of destruction was extraordinary. The cruelty toward resistant monks was brutal. The broken promises to pensioners and the poor. The cultural vandalism was inexcusable. The dissolution of the monasteries was one of the most dramatic and consequential events in English history. A revolution in property, religion, culture, and society, accomplished in less than 5 years through a combination of legal process, propaganda, and brute force. The Tudor court was the center of English political, social, and cultural life, a magnificent, dangerous world where careers were made and destroyed, where one could rise from obscurity to greatness or fall from favor to the scaffold, and where proximity to the king meant both opportunity and peril. Understanding Tudor England requires exploring this court, its structure, its personalities, its rituals, and its psychological dynamics. The structure of the court. The royal household was a complex, hierarchical organization, the king's privy chamber the most intimate space, where Henry conducted private business. Access was highly restricted. Gentlemen of the privy chamber, about 6-12 men, served here. The groom of the stool, a position that sounds absurd, but was actually extremely powerful, attended the king's most private moments. These men had constant access to Henry. They could whisper in his ear, influence decisions, and control access. The presence chamber and great hall, more public spaces, where the king received visitors and held audiences. Courtiers gathered hoping to catch the king's attention. Ritual and ceremony governed all interactions. The yeomen of the guard provided security and ceremony. The queen's household, each queen maintained a separate household. Ladies-in-waiting attended the queen. These positions were sought after. Proximity to the queen meant influence and marriage prospects. The queen's household was a center of female power and intrigue. The household below stairs, kitchens, stables, and service areas. Hundreds of servants, craftsmen, and officials. Complex hierarchy from kitchen boys to master cooks. The logistics of feeding, clothing, and housing the court. The numbers. The royal household included 500-800 plus people. During special occasions, the court swelled to over 1,000. The court consumed enormous resources: food, drink, fuel, luxuries. The geography of court. The court was itinerant, moving between palaces. Hampton Court Palace, originally built by Cardinal Wolsey, seized by Henry. Magnificent Renaissance Palace. Henry expanded it extensively, setting for many of the dramatic events of his reign. Whitehall Palace, Henry's principal London residence. Enormous complex, largest palace in Europe at the time, strategically located near Westminster Parliament and law courts. Destroyed by fire in the 17th century, only the banqueting house survives. Greenwich Palace, Henry's birthplace, important riverside palace, used for tournaments and celebrations. Windsor Castle, medieval fortress and palace, used for formal occasions and as a stronghold. St. George's Chapel was burial place for royalty. Richmond, Nonsuch, and others. Henry built and maintained numerous palaces. The court moved seasonally, and when plague threatened. Moving was logistically complex, hundreds of wagons transporting furniture, supplies, and people. The rituals and ceremonies. Court life was governed by elaborate ritual. The rising and retiring the king's day began with ceremony. Gentlemen of the privy chamber attended him. Dressing was a ritual with specific roles. Similarly, retiring at night involved ceremony. Meals, dining was public and ceremonial. The king ate in state, often alone, or with select companions. Elaborate courses were served with precise protocol. Food was tasted to detect poison. The ceremony demonstrated magnificence and order. Audiences' access to the king was controlled and ritualized. Petitioners had to follow protocol. The king's time was structured by ceremony. Breaking protocol was serious offense. Religious services, daily mass and prayers. The chapel royal provided music and ceremony. Religious observance was public and important. The king's piety was displayed through participation. Tournaments and entertainments, jousting tournaments, were major events. Henry participated personally until a serious injury in 1536. Pageantry, costume, and symbolism were elaborate. These events displayed royal power and magnificence. Masks and banquets, elaborate theatrical entertainments. Music, dancing, and costumes. The king and courtiers participated. These demonstrated cultural sophistication. The pursuit of favor. Court life centered on gaining and maintaining royal favor patronage. The king controlled appointments to offices, court positions, church benefices, land grants, and pensions. Access to patronage meant power and wealth. Courtiers competed for the king's attention and generosity. Factions court divided into competing groups. Religious divisions, conservatives versus reformers. Personal rivalries and family alliances. Factions competed for the king's favor and policy influence. The psychology of Henry's favor was unpredictable. He could be charming and generous one day, cold the next. Paranoia about loyalty meant favor could vanish suddenly. Courtiers lived in constant anxiety. The rise and fall pattern. Brilliant careers could be built in months, but falls were equally swift. From favorite to traitor's scaffold in weeks. No one was safe, as Wolsey, Cromwell, and others learned. The great court figures. Beyond the king and queens, numerous individuals shaped court life. Thomas Cromwell c. 1485-1540 rose from obscurity to become Henry's chief minister. Brilliant administrator, ruthless politician. Engineered the break with Rome and dissolution of monasteries. Accumulated enormous power and wealth. Fell in 1540, partly due to the Anne of Cleves marriage failure, partly factional politics. Executed on Tower Hill. Thomas Cranmer 1489-1556, Archbishop of Canterbury from 1533. Supported Henry's break with Rome. Theologically Protestant but politically cautious. Survived Henry's reign through careful navigation. Would be burned as a heretic under Mary I. Charles Brandon, Duke of Suffolk c. 1484-1545, Henry's closest friend and brother-in-law, married Henry's sister Mary. Military commander and courtier. One of the few who maintained Henry's favor throughout the reign. Survived because he avoided politics and focused on friendship. Edward Seymour, Earl of Hertford, later Duke of Somerset, brother of Jane Seymour. Rose to prominence as uncle to Prince Edward. Military commander. Would become Lord Protector during Edward VI's minority. Eventually executed in 1552. The Howard family, the Dukes of Norfolk, were among England's premier nobles. They provided two of Henry's queens, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. They led the conservative Catholic faction. Survived Henry's reign through political skill. Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk, was a wily politician who outlasted rivals. Stephen Gardiner c. 1497-1555, Bishop of Winchester. Conservative Catholic, lawyer and diplomat. Factional leader opposing Protestants. Survived Henry, became Mary I's Lord Chancellor. The dangers of court life. The court was magnificent but deadly. The fall of the mighty Cardinal Wolsey 1530, from the most powerful man after the king to arrest and death. Died before trial, natural causes or suicide uncertain. Sir Thomas More 1535, from Lord Chancellor to executed traitor. Refused to acknowledge royal supremacy. Beheaded on Tower Hill. Anne Boleyn 1536, from queen to executed adulteress/traitoress. Judicial murder on fabricated charges. Thomas Cromwell 1540. From Henry's indispensable minister to attainted traitor. Beheaded without trial, act of attainder. Catherine Howard 1542, from queen to executed adulteress. Beheaded on Tower Green. The mechanics of destruction, treason charges, expanded to include words and intent. Evidence could be manufactured. Trials were often predetermined. Few escaped once accused. Attainder parliamentary act declaring someone guilty. No trial needed. Resulted in execution and confiscation of property. Efficiently destroyed enemies. Torture used to extract confessions. The rack, the scavenger's daughter, and other devices. Confessions obtained under torture were used as evidence. Technically illegal but practiced in the Tower. Execution methods: beheading for nobles considered honorable. Usually by axe, sometimes took multiple strokes. Occasionally by sword, as with Anne Boleyn, considered more merciful. Hanging, drawing, and quartering, for commoners and traitors. Horrific: hanged until nearly dead, cut down, disemboweled while alive, then quartered. Bodies displayed as warning. Burning for heresy, religious offenses. Particularly horrible death. Used for both Catholics during Protestant periods and Protestants during Catholic periods. The culture of the court. Despite the dangers, the court was a center of culture. Music. The Chapel Royal was among Europe's finest musical establishments. Composers like Thomas Tallis created masterpieces. Henry himself composed his piece Pastime with Good Company survives. Instruments: lute, virginal's early keyboard, viols, recorders. Court musicians were highly valued. Literature: court poets like Sir Thomas Wyatt and the Earl of Surrey. They introduced the sonnet to English literature. Courtly love poetry was popular. Some poetry had political subtexts carefully coded. Visual arts: Hans Holbein the Younger painted court portraits. His images of Henry VIII, Cromwell, More, and others are iconic. Miniature painting flourished. Illuminated manuscripts and decorative arts. Learning and scholarship: humanist education was valued. Court included scholars and intellectuals. Greek and Latin were studied. The court library was substantial. Fashion: clothing was extraordinarily expensive and elaborate. Sumptuary laws regulated who could wear what. Fashion was competitive. Courtiers needed magnificent wardrobes. Fabrics: silk, velvet, cloth of gold, furs. Jewels, embroidery, and accessories. Architecture and building: Henry built and renovated palaces constantly. Renaissance architectural ideas from Italy influenced design. Hampton Court exemplified Tudor magnificence. The cost was enormous. The daily life of a courtier. What was daily life like for someone at Henry's court? Morning: rising early. The court day began at dawn. Dressing in appropriate finery. Attending mass in the chapel royal. Breakfast for those important enough to dine with the king. Midday: attending the king for those with access. Waiting in the presence chamber hoping for audience. Business, petitions, and conversations. Dinner: the main meal, around noon. Afternoon: hunting if the king hunted and one was invited. Tennis or other sports. Music and conversation. Walking in the gardens. Evening: supper, lighter meal. Entertainment: music, dancing, masks. Cards or dice gambling was popular. Retiring usually early by modern standards. The constant anxiety monitoring the king's mood. Watching for signs of favor or displeasure. Navigating factional politics. Balancing ambition with survival. Women at court. Women had specific roles and constraints. Queens and ladies in waiting. The queen's household was a center of female society. Ladies in waiting were often from noble families. Positions were sought after potential for advantageous marriages, but also dangerous, as Catherine Howard learned her past relationships were exposed by former household members. Marriage market: court was where marriages were arranged. Noble families sent daughters to court, hoping for good matches. The king's favor could make or break marriage prospects. Limited power but real influence: women couldn't hold office or vote, but they could influence through personal relationships. Queens interceded for petitioners. Noblewomen managed estates when husbands were at court or war. Dangers: sexual vulnerability, unwanted advances from powerful men. Reputation was everything. Accusations of immodesty destroyed women. Political intrigue could target women. 2 queens were executed, others suffered. The court as political theater. Every aspect of court life had political meaning. Ceremonial placement: where one stood in processions mattered. Proximity to the king indicated favor. Disputes over precedence were serious. Gift giving: New Year's gifts to the king were expected. The value and taste of gifts were noted. Royal gifts in return indicated favor. Dress and display: magnificent clothing demonstrated loyalty and prosperity. The king noticed who dressed well. Poverty or modesty could be interpreted negatively. Conversation and wit: clever conversation was valued, but indiscretion was dangerous. Every word might be reported. Silence was sometimes safer than speech. The court was thus a place where the personal was always political, where magnificence masked danger, where brilliance and brutality coexisted, and where ambitious men and women gambled with their lives for power, wealth, and glory. Henry VIII break with Rome created a religious revolution, but the nature of that revolution was complex and contested. Was England Protestant or Catholic? The answer changed depending on who had the king's ear and what the political moment demanded. Understanding Tudor religious politics requires navigating theological debates, factional struggles, and Henry's own contradictory religious views. Henry's personal religion. Henry VIII was not a Protestant reformer like Martin Luther or John Calvin. His theological conservatism: he believed in Catholic theology, transubstantiation, 7 sacraments, clerical celibacy, etc. He heard Mass daily and was personally pious. He had written a book attacking Luther's defense of the Seven Sacraments, 1521, for which the Pope gave him the title Defender of the Faith. Ironically, English monarchs still use this title. He saw himself as a reformer of abuses, not of doctrine. His break with Rome was political, not theological. He rejected papal authority but not Catholic theology. He wanted to be Pope in England's supreme head of an English Catholic Church. He persecuted both Catholics who rejected his supremacy and radical Protestants who rejected Catholic theology. His contradictions: he defended Catholic theology while destroying Catholic institutions, monasteries. He called himself Catholic while creating an independent church. He executed Catholics for denying royal supremacy and Protestants for denying transubstantiation. He used Protestant arguments when convenient against papal authority, but suppressed Protestantism when it threatened his control. The religious factions at court. Court divided into competing religious groups: the conservatives, Catholic-leaning leaders, Thomas Howard, 3rd Duke of Norfolk; Stephen Gardiner, Bishop of Winchester; Edmund Bonner, Bishop of London. Beliefs: maintained Catholic theology and practices, accepted royal supremacy, had to, or faced treason charges, opposed further Protestant reforms, wanted to preserve traditional religion minus the Pope. Support base: older nobility, much of the clergy, Northern England which had resisted the Reformation, common people in many areas attached to traditional practices. Strategy: influence Henry against Protestant changes, persecute Protestant heretics, maintain alliance with Catholic European powers when possible. The Reformers: Protestant-leaning leaders, Thomas Cromwell until 1540, Thomas Cranmer, Archbishop of Canterbury; Edward Seymour, later Duke of Somerset; Queen Catherine Parr. Cautiously. Beliefs: wanted further reform toward Protestantism, emphasized scripture over tradition, opposed superstitious practices, veneration of relics, prayers to saints, supported vernacular Bible and services. Support base: younger courtiers, some merchants and urban populations, university reformers, those who had profited from dissolution, vested interest in not returning to Catholicism. Strategy: gradually push for more Protestant reforms, educate the young Prince Edward in Protestantism, promote English Bible and prayer book, avoid provoking Henry's conservative instincts. The factional struggle. The two groups competed for the king's favor and policy direction. The rise of reformers. 1530s, Cromwell's influence pushed reform forward. Dissolution of monasteries weakened conservative institutions. The English Bible was authorized 1539. Reformers seemed ascendant. The conservative reaction. 1539-1540, the Act of 6 Articles, 1539, reasserted Catholic theology. Known as the whip with 6 strings, it mandated transubstantiation, Catholic view of Eucharist, communion in one kind, bread only, not wine, for laity, clerical celibacy, monastic vows, private masses, auricular confession. Denial of these was heresy, punishable by burning. This was a conservative victory. Cromwell's fall. 1540, the Anne of Cleves' marriage failure weakened him. Conservative enemies. Norfolk, Gardiner attacked. He was arrested for heresy and treason, executed without trial. Conservatives triumphed. The pendulum swings. 1540-1547, neither faction completely won. Henry balanced them against each other. Policy shifted based on immediate political needs. Both factions suffered casualties, the victims of religious conflict. Both Catholics and Protestants were executed, Catholic martyrs. The Carthusian monks. 1535, refused to accept royal supremacy. Several were hanged, drawn, and quartered, died for papal authority. Sir Thomas More. 1535, refused to swear the oath of supremacy, beheaded for treason. John Fisher. 1535, Bishop of Rochester, resisted royal supremacy, executed at age 80+. Protestant martyrs. John Frith. 1533, young theologian, denied transubstantiation, burned at the stake. Robert Barnes. 1540, Lutheran preacher, executed during conservative reaction, burned at the same time as 3 Catholic priests were hanged, drawn, and quartered, demonstrating Henry's balance. Anne Askew. 1546, gentlewoman, Protestant, refused to recant, tortured on the rack trying to implicate Catherine Parr, burned at the stake. Her courage was noted even by enemies. The pattern: Henry executed Catholics who denied his supremacy and Protestants who denied Catholic theology, trying to maintain his unique position as Catholic supreme head of an independent church. The English Bible. One of the most important religious developments was the English Bible. William Tyndale c. 1494-1536 translated the New Testament into English. Worked in exile, Henry opposed English Bibles initially. His translation was beautiful and influential. The King James Bible would borrow heavily. He was arrested in Antwerp and executed, strangled, then burned in 1536. His last words, "Lord, open the King of England's eyes." The authorization 1539. Ironically, shortly after Tyndale's death, Henry authorized the Great Bible. Based largely on Tyndale's translation, placed in every parish church, common people could read scripture in English for the first time. The impact: revolutionary people could read the Bible themselves. This undermined church authority. Interpretations could differ. It promoted literacy. The English language was shaped by biblical translation. Once available, it couldn't be taken back. Mary's attempt to suppress English Bibles failed. The Book of Common Prayer, introduced 1549. After Henry's death, Thomas Cranmer composed it during Edward VI's reign. Standardized worship in English, not Latin. Beautiful language that shaped English literature. But this was after Henry. During his reign, worship remained largely in Latin. Religious life for common people. How did ordinary English people experience these changes? Confusion and disruption. Policies changed frequently. What was orthodox one year might be heresy the next. People didn't know what to believe. Attachment to tradition. Many loved the old religion, beautiful ceremonies, familiar rituals, saints' days, pilgrimages. The destruction of shrines and monasteries was painful. Protestant services seemed bare and cold. Gradual acceptance. Younger people, who grew up with the new ways, accepted them. Economic interests. Those who bought monastic lands supported the changes. Fear of punishment encouraged compliance. Regional variations. London and the southeast were more Protestant. The north and west remained more Catholic. Enforcement varied by location. Practical religion. Most people were pragmatic. They followed whatever the law required. Private beliefs might differ from public conformity. Survival mattered more than theology for many. The role of the clergy. The clergy faced difficult choices. Parish priests had to implement changing policies. Some were reformers who welcomed change. Some were conservatives who resisted. Most tried to navigate safely. Bishops divided between reformers. Cranmer and conservatives. Gardiner had to enforce royal policies or lose their positions. Some were genuinely conflicted. The oath of supremacy. All clergy had to swear Henry was supreme head. Most did. Refusing meant loss of position and possibly death. This compromised the church but ensured survival. Clerical marriage forbidden under the Act of 6 Articles. But some reformist clergy married secretly. After Henry's death, clerical marriage was permitted briefly. This became a major theological divide. The international context. England's religious changes occurred within European religious wars. The Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther's Theses 1517 sparked Protestant movements. Various Protestant groups emerged: Lutheran, Reformed/Calvinist, Anabaptist. Much of Germany, Scandinavia, and parts of Switzerland became Protestant. France remained Catholic but had a large Protestant minority, Huguenots. The Catholic Counter-Reformation. The Catholic Church responded with Reform's Council of Trent. New religious orders. Jesuits fought Protestantism. Catholic powers. Spain, France, sometimes Holy Roman Empire opposed Protestants. England's position, neither fully Protestant nor Catholic, distrusted by both sides, threatened with papal-sponsored invasion, sought alliances pragmatically, sometimes with Protestants, sometimes with Catholics. Henry's foreign policy dictated by politics, not religion. Allied with whoever served English interests. Used religion as diplomatic tool, but wasn't bound by it. The legacy of Henrician religious policy. Henry's religious settlement was unstable. It didn't satisfy anyone completely. Catholics wanted restoration of papal authority. Protestants wanted theological reform. Henry's middle way pleased neither. It set the stage for further conflict. Edward VI's reign 1547-1553 moved decisively Protestant. Mary I's reign 1553-1558 attempted Catholic restoration. Elizabeth I's reign 1558-1603 created a moderate Protestant settlement. Religious conflict continued for over a century, but it achieved Henry's goals: royal supremacy over the church, confiscation of monastic wealth, independence from Rome, a uniquely English church. The question of whether Henry created a Protestant or Catholic church misses the point. He created a Henrician church, neither fully one nor the other, subject to royal authority and shaped by the king's personal theology and political needs. This unstable compromise would collapse after his death, but during his reign, he maintained it through force of will and willingness to execute both Catholics and Protestants. The final years of Henry VIII's reign saw the once athletic king transformed into a bloated, paranoid invalid still capable of cruelty, but increasingly dependent on his ministers and physicians, still demanding obedience but unable to control events as he once had. His death in 1547 ended an era and left England facing an uncertain future. The physical decline. Henry's health deteriorated dramatically in his final decade. The 1536 jousting accident, a turning point in Henry's physical and psychological health. He was thrown from his horse while jousting. He was unconscious for 2 hours. A horse fell on him. He suffered a leg wound that never healed properly. The ulcerated leg, the 1536 injury, developed into chronic ulcers. They were extremely painful and required constant dressing. They became infected repeatedly. Modern diagnosis suggests osteomyelitis, bone infection. The smell was reportedly terrible. Weight gain. Henry became massively obese. By the 1540s, his waist was about 54 inches. He had to be moved by mechanical hoists and carried in a chair. His weight exacerbated other health problems. Other ailments: possible diabetes suggested by obesity, ulcers, and other symptoms, possible Cushing's syndrome, probable gout, possible syphilis debated by historians. Some symptoms match, others don't. Insomnia and headaches. Psychological changes. The 1536 accident may have caused brain injury. His personality became more paranoid and cruel. Mood swings increased. Memory problems appeared. Some historians suggest traumatic brain injury explains his behavioral changes. The impact on governance. Henry became less active in day-to-day administration. He relied more heavily on ministers and the Privy Council. But he remained the final authority and could still be terrifying. His illness made him more dangerous, paranoid, unpredictable, in pain. The final marriages. We've already explored Catherine Howard and Catherine Parr, but their marriages dominated Henry's final years. Catherine Howard married 1540-1542, a brief attempt to recapture youth. Her execution devastated Henry. He wept when informed of the evidence against her. After her death, he never fully recovered psychologically. Catherine Parr married 1543-1547, more nurse than wife. She managed his difficult moods skillfully. She reconciled him with his daughters. She survived his dangerous final years through intelligence and submission. The final wars. Henry's last years saw renewed military adventures: the war with Scotland, ongoing conflict with Scotland, England's traditional enemy. The Battle of Solway Moss 1542, English victory. James V of Scotland died shortly after, leaving infant Mary, later Mary Queen of Scots. Henry sought to control Scotland through marriage alliance, betrothing Mary to his son Edward. The Scots resisted, leading to continued warfare. The war with France 1543-1546, Henry's last continental war, allied with Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, against France. The Siege of Boulogne 1544. Henry personally led the army his last military campaign. Boulogne was captured, but the campaign was expensive. Peace was made in 1546, with France agreeing to buy back Boulogne. The cost: wars consumed the wealth from dissolved monasteries. Henry debased the coinage, reducing silver content to raise money. This caused inflation and economic problems. By 1547, the treasury was nearly empty. The succession question. As Henry's health declined, succession planning became critical. The Third Succession Act 1544 confirmed Edward as heir. If Edward died without heirs, Mary Catherine of Aragon's daughter would inherit. If Mary died without heirs, Elizabeth Anne Boleyn's daughter would inherit. This reversed previous acts that had bastardized both daughters. It established the order that would eventually unfold Edward VIII. Mary I, Elizabeth I. Prince Edward, born in 1537, he was only 9 when Henry died. Intelligent and well-educated, raised as a Protestant. Physically frail, would die at age 15. His minority would require a regency. The factional struggle reformers led by Edward Seymour, later Duke of Somerset, positioned themselves to control Edward's regency. Conservatives led by the Duke of Norfolk and Gardiner fought to maintain influence. Henry balanced the factions until his death. The Regency Council Henry's will established a Regency Council to govern during Edward's minority. It included both reformers and conservatives, theoretically balanced. But the reformers quickly seized control after Henry's death. The final victims. Even in his last months, Henry continued executing enemies. The Earl of Surrey executed January 1547. Henry Howard, son of the Duke of Norfolk, talented poet, introduced blank verse to English poetry. Accused of treason, displaying royal arms, allegedly planning to seize power during Edward's minority. Executed on Tower Hill just days before Henry's death. His father, the Duke of Norfolk, was also sentenced to death but was saved by Henry's death. The execution warrant wasn't signed before Henry died. These executions demonstrated that even dying, Henry was dangerous. The final illness and death. In late 1546 and early 1547, Henry's health collapsed. December 1546, Henry became seriously ill. He was largely confined to his chambers. Access to him was restricted. Power shifted to those around him, especially Edward Seymour. January 1547, his condition worsened. Fever, infection from the leg ulcers, and general organ failure. He knew he was dying. The last rites Archbishop Cranmer was called. Henry was too weak to speak but squeezed Cranmer's hand, interpreted as faith in God's mercy. He received final Catholic rites, though Cranmer was Protestant. The ceremony was traditional. Death January 28, 1547. Henry VIII died at Whitehall Palace. He was 55 years old. He had reigned for 37 years and 9 months. The news was kept secret for several days to allow the reformers to consolidate power. The funeral. Henry's funeral was magnificent, but troubled the lying in state. His body was embalmed and placed in a lead coffin. It lay in state at Whitehall, then moved to Windsor for burial. The procession to Windsor, elaborate ceremony with hundreds of mourners. The coffin was placed on a grand hearse funeral cart. The journey took several days. The legend, a later story, possibly apocryphal, claimed that the coffin burst open during the journey and dogs licked up the blood. This was seen as divine judgment, recalling a prophecy that dogs would lick his blood as they had Ahab's in the Bible. Whether true or invented propaganda is debated. The burial February 16, 1547, at St. George's Chapel, Windsor Castle. He was buried in the vault with Jane Seymour, his third wife, who gave him his son. The tomb was supposed to be magnificent. Henry had planned an elaborate monument, but it was never completed. Only a simple marker exists today: the will and succession. Henry's will, dated December 30, 1546, made final arrangements: the succession Edward, then Mary, then Elizabeth, as the third succession act specified. If all three died without heirs, the throne would pass to descendants of Henry's younger sister, Mary, not his older sister Margaret, whose descendants included Mary, Queen of Scots. Henry preferred the English-born line. The Regency Council named 16 executors, supposedly balanced between reformers and conservatives. But the reformers quickly seized control. Bequests provisions for prayers for his soul, ironically, given his break with Rome. Gifts to servants and favorites. Money for charitable purposes. Legitimacy questions. The will's authenticity has been debated. It bears a stamp, not Henry's signature. Some suspect it was altered or even forged by reformers, but it was accepted as valid. The immediate aftermath. Edward VI's accession transformed England. Edward Seymour became Lord Protector. He pushed aggressively Protestant reforms. The Latin Mass was replaced with the English Book of Common Prayer. Religious images were destroyed. Clerical marriage was permitted. England became decisively Protestant. The conservatives were sidelined. The Duke of Norfolk remained imprisoned, released only after Mary I became queen. Bishop Gardiner was imprisoned. The careful balance Henry maintained collapsed. The religious settlement Henry created Catholic theology with royal supremacy was swept away, replaced by Protestantism. Henry's legacy. What did Henry VIII leave England? Political, a strengthened monarchy with unprecedented power, supreme head of church and state. But financial problems, treasury depleted by wars and extravagance. A complex succession, 3 potential heirs, all with vulnerabilities. Religious and independent English church permanently separated from Rome. But religious division and instability. The destruction of monasteries and Catholic institutions. A Protestant heir, Edward, who would push further reform. Social and economic redistribution of monastic lands, creating new gentry class. Economic disruption from dissolution and debasement. Loss of charitable institutions that monasteries provided. Cultural, the English Bible and beginnings of English language worship, but destruction of medieval art, architecture, and libraries. A more literate population stimulated by Bible availability. International England as an independent power, not subservient to Pope or Emperor, but isolated and distrusted by Catholic Europe. An unstable relationship with Scotland. Personal, the execution of 2 wives and thousands of others. A reign remembered for magnificence and terror. A complex character, cultured and cruel, intelligent and egotistical, pious and murderous, the judgment of history. Henry VIII remains one of England's most controversial monarchs. Traditional views. 16th–19th centuries, Protestant historians praised him for breaking with Rome. Catholic historians condemned him as a tyrant and schismatic. Both saw him as a figure of enormous historical importance. Victorian and early modern views fascination with his marriages. Moral judgment on his marital and personal behavior. Seen as larger-than-life figure. Modern historical assessment, recognized as transforming England fundamentally. Credit for strengthening monarchy and creating Church of England. But condemnation for cruelty, judicial murders, and destruction. Psychological interpretations, narcissism, possible brain injury, etc. Understanding him as a product of his time, not judging by modern standards, but by 16th century norms. The popular image, the bloated tyrant with 6 wives. Magnificent and terrifying. Larger than life, almost mythical. Central to English historical identity. Henry VIII died after 37 years on the throne, leaving a transformed England wealthier in some ways, those who gained monastic lands, poorer in others, cultural losses, depleted treasury, religiously divided, politically centralized, and facing an uncertain future with a child king and competing factions. His reign was a hinge point in English history. The medieval Catholic kingdom became an early modern Protestant state, and nothing would ever be the same. Here we pause once more in our exploration of Tudor England. We have witnessed the dissolution of the monasteries, one of history's greatest transfers of wealth, accomplished through a combination of legal process and brute force. We have explored the magnificent, dangerous world of Henry VIII court, where favor meant everything, and one misstep could mean the scaffold. We have navigated the complex religious politics that saw both Catholics and Protestants executed, and we have accompanied Henry through his final years of physical decline, paranoia, and death. As you drift towards sleep, imagine the Tudor world in transition, the ruins of great abbeys standing empty across the countryside, courtiers whispering in palace corridors about who has the king's favor, theologians debating scripture while pyres burn heretics, and an aging, pain-racked king trying to control a kingdom and a succession as his health fails and death approaches. When we conclude our journey, we will explore the reigns of Henry's children, Edward VI's Protestant Revolution, Mary I's bloody attempt at Catholic restoration, and Elizabeth I's Golden Age. We will examine daily life in Tudor England beyond the court, the cultural achievements of the era, and the lasting impact of the Tudor dynasty on England and the world. We will also reflect on what this endlessly fascinating period teaches us about power, religion, personality, and historical change. But for now, rest. The Tower of London still stands where queens and ministers lost their heads, the portraits of Henry and his wives gaze from museum walls, and the ruins of dissolved monasteries, the English countryside silent witnesses to a revolutionary era that shaped the modern world. Edward VI's brief reign, 1547 1553, saw England transformed from Henry VIII's ambiguous religious settlement into a decisively Protestant nation. This 9-year-old king, guided by regents and councillors, presided over radical reforms that reshaped English religion, destroyed centuries of Catholic tradition, and set the stage for decades of religious conflict. Understanding Edward's reign requires examining the power struggles among his regents, the systematic Protestantization of England, and the brief, tragic life of a brilliant but sickly boy who died at 15, having changed his kingdom forever. The Boy King 1537–1547. Edward Tudor was born on October 12, 1537, at Hampton Court Palace. His birth, the longed-for son, finally achieved after Henry's break with Rome and 2 failed marriages. His mother Jane Seymour died 12 days later from puerperal fever. Henry genuinely mourned Jane more than any other wife and treasured Edward. Edward was legitimate, male and healthy, initially everything Henry wanted. His childhood, raised separately from his half-sisters Mary and Elizabeth as protocol demanded for the heir, given an exceptional education by leading humanist scholars, learned Latin, Greek, French, theology, and sciences. Raised as a Protestant by Protestant tutors, especially after 1543. Physically frail, he had various childhood illnesses and was never robust. Serious, studious, and precociously intelligent. Psychologically scarred by his mother's death and emotionally distant father. His personality intensely pious even by 16th century standards. Intellectually brilliant but emotionally cold. Committed to Protestant theology with zealot's fervor. Dutiful and responsible beyond his years. Little sense of humor or warmth. Obsessed with order, discipline, and correct doctrine. His accession January 28, 1547. Edward was 9 years old when Henry VIII died. News of the death was kept secret for several days while reformers consolidated power. Edward was proclaimed king on January 31. His coronation took place on February 20, 1547, at Westminster Abbey. The Seymour Protectorate 1547–1549. Edward Seymour, Earl of Hertford, soon created Duke of Somerset, became Lord Protector, his position uncle to the king, brother of Jane Seymour. Military commander with successful record. Leader of the Protestant Reform faction. Seized power immediately after Henry's death by controlling access to Edward. His character arrogant and high-handed, genuinely committed to Protestant reform. Somewhat idealistic about social reform. Poor politician, made unnecessary enemies. Military competent but politically inept. His reforms: religious transformation, the Chantries Act 1547, dissolved all chantries chapels where priests prayed for the dead, confiscated their lands and wealth. This eliminated prayers for the dead, a Catholic practice Protestants rejected. Thousands of priests lost employment. The wealth supposedly would fund schools few were actually founded. The First Book of Common Prayer 1549, composed by Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, replaced the Latin Mass with English services. Required in all churches by the Act of Uniformity, 1549. More moderate than later Protestant services, but decisively Protestant. Beautiful language that influenced English literature for centuries. The people could now understand worship no longer in Latin. Iconoclasm, image-breaking destruction of religious images, statues, and decorations in churches. Whitewashing of wall paintings. Smashing of stained glass windows. Removal of altars replaced with communion tables. This transformed English churches visually from colorful, image-filled spaces to bare, white-walled buildings. Clerical marriage. Priests were now permitted to marry, reversing centuries of Catholic practice. Many clergy took advantage immediately, including Cranmer, who had secretly married earlier. This was controversial. Many people thought married priests were scandalous. The Edwardian Injunctions 1547 ordered removal of superstitious objects from churches' images, relics, mandated English Bible in every church, required quarterly sermons, promoted Protestant theology. Social reforms. Somerset was unusual in caring about the poor. Enclosure policy, enclosure fencing common lands for sheep farming displaced peasants. Somerset opposed enclosures and tried to limit them. He appointed commissions to investigate abuses. This made him unpopular with the gentry and nobility who profited from enclosures. The Prayer Book Rebellion 1549, The religious changes provoked violent resistance. The Western Rebellion, Devon and Cornwall, began in June 1549 when the new prayer book was introduced. Rebels demanded return to the Latin Mass and Catholic practices. They besieged Exeter for weeks. The rebels were conservative, rural, and attached to traditional religion. The East Anglian Rebellion, Kett's Rebellion, led by Robert Kett, a prosperous tanner, primarily about economic grievances and closures, rents, but also had religious elements. Some rebels were Protestant, opposing conservative gentry. Rebels captured Norwich briefly. Somerset's response, initially conciliatory, tried negotiation, eventually used force armies under John Dudley, Earl of Warwick. Both rebellions were crushed brutally. Perhaps 3,000–4,000 rebels were killed. Leaders were executed. Kett was hanged from Norwich castle walls. The rebellions demonstrated many people hated the religious changes. Somerset's reforms had alienated both commons' religion and elites' enclosures. The regime's control was fragile. The war with Scotland. Somerset continued Henry VIII policy of trying to control Scotland. The rough wooing Henry VIII had sought to marry Edward to Mary, Queen of Scots, his great niece. The Scots refused, seeking French alliance instead. Somerset invaded Scotland to force the marriage. The Battle of Pinkie, September 1547, decisive English victory. Thousands of Scots killed. But strategic failure. Scotland didn't submit. Mary was sent to France, eventually marrying the French Dauphin. The continuing war, expensive and ultimately futile, drained resources, made enemies. Scotland allied with France, threatening England. Somerset's fall, October 1549. Somerset's policies and personality created fatal opposition. His enemies: John Dudley, Earl of Warwick, ambitious rival. Conservatives who hated religious changes, gentry and nobles who resented social reforms and high-handed manner. Councillors he'd excluded from power. The coup in October 1549, Somerset tried to rally support by taking Edward to Windsor. The council, led by Warwick, declared Somerset a traitor. Somerset initially resisted but surrendered when he realized he had no support. He was arrested and imprisoned in the Tower. Initially, Somerset was spared execution, released in early 1550. But in 1551, he was re-arrested on dubious charges of plotting against Warwick and executed in January 1552. The Dudley regime, 1549–1553. John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, created Duke in 1551, dominated the final years of Edward's reign. His character ruthless, ambitious, and politically skillful. Militarily competent, less ideological than Somerset but pragmatically Protestant. Focused on power and enrichment, his consolidation removed Somerset and his supporters, packed the council with allies, controlled access to Edward, enriched himself enormously, confiscating lands and offices. Further religious reform, Dudley pushed even more radical Protestantism, partly from conviction, partly to court Protestant councillors, and appeal to Edward's zeal. The Second Book of Common Prayer, 1552, much more Protestant than the 1549 version. Eliminated any hint of Catholic theology. Communion service clearly Protestant memorial, not sacrifice. No prayers for the dead. Simplified ceremonies. Even reformers like Martin Bucer, German Protestant theologian advising Edward, thought it went too far. The 42 Articles, 1553, defined Church of England's theology explicitly as Protestant, rejected Catholic doctrines, transubstantiation, purgatory, etc. Affirmed Protestant positions, justification by faith alone, 2 sacraments not 7. Later revised as the 39 Articles, still defining Anglican theology today. Further iconoclasm, destruction of remaining Catholic imagery, confiscation of church plate and valuables. Churches were stripped bare. The Ordinal, 1550, new ordination service for clergy, explicitly Protestant. Rejected Catholic priesthood theology. By 1553, England was decisively, aggressively Protestant. Catholic practices were illegal. Churches were bare. The liturgy was in English and Protestant. Clergy were married, and Catholic theology was forbidden. Foreign policy. Dudley ended the expensive wars. Peace with France, 1550, Treaty of Boulogne returned Boulogne to France in exchange for payment. Ended the Scottish War, accepting that Mary would marry the French Dauphin. Pragmatic but humiliating. Somerset's military adventures had achieved nothing. Domestic focus: the regime focused on consolidating power and Protestant reforms. Financial reforms: though much wealth was embezzled by Dudley and allies. Naval reforms: foundation for Elizabethan navy. Edward's growing influence. As Edward matured, he took increasing interest in governance. His political education: he attended council meetings from age 13. He wrote summaries of discussions in his diary. He expressed opinions and influenced decisions. He was highly intelligent and precociously articulate. His religious zeal: Edward was fanatically Protestant. He supported the most radical reforms enthusiastically. He condemned his Catholic half-sister Mary. He referred to the Mass as idolatry and Catholics as papists. His tutors had raised him to see Protestantism as absolute truth. His diary: Edward kept a remarkable diary 1550-1553. It reveals his interests: politics, religion, hunting, military matters. It's emotionally cold, recording his uncle Somerset's execution dispassionately. It shows a brilliant but charmless boy, obsessed with duty and doctrine. His journal entry on Somerset's execution, January 1552, the Duke of Somerset had his head cut off upon Tower Hill between 8 and 9 o'clock in the morning. Clinical, detached, without emotion. The succession crisis, 1553. In early 1553, it became clear Edward was dying. His illness, probably tuberculosis, though exact diagnosis debated, possibly pneumonia, possibly bronchopneumonia. He had been sickly since childhood. In early 1553, his health collapsed. Coughing, fever, wasting away. By May, he was clearly dying. He knew he was dying and faced it with religious faith and grim acceptance. The succession problem: Henry VIII will, and the Third Succession Act named Mary Catherine of Aragon's daughter as heir after Edward. But Mary was Catholic. Edward and Dudley were horrified at the prospect of Catholic restoration. All their Protestant reforms would be reversed. Edward's device for the succession: Edward, guided by Dudley, drafted a plan to alter the succession. The original plan bypassed Mary and Elizabeth, both declared illegitimate by previous acts. Named Lady Jane Grey, Edward's cousin, great-granddaughter of Henry VII, as heir. Jane was Protestant, intelligent, and married to Dudley's son Guildford Dudley. The justification: Mary was Catholic, would destroy true religion. Elizabeth was also questionable. Anne Boleyn's daughter, legitimacy disputed. The Protestant succession must be preserved. Edward sincerely believed this was God's will. The legal problems: the Third Succession Act had legal force passed by Parliament. Edward's device had no parliamentary approval. It contradicted his father's will. It required councillors and judges to commit treason-defying statute. Dudley pressured judges and councillors to sign the device. Many were reluctant, knowing it was legally dubious. But fear of Dudley and the dying king's wishes forced compliance. Even Archbishop Cranmer signed despite misgivings. Edward's death, July 6, 1553, he died at Greenwich Palace at about 8 p.m. He was 15 years old. He had reigned for 6 years. His last words reportedly: "I am faint, Lord have mercy upon me, and take my spirit." His body buried in Westminster Abbey. Protestant funeral service. The first English monarch buried with Protestant rites. The tomb is modest, no elaborate monument. The attempt to install Lady Jane Grey. Edward's death triggered a brief, doomed attempt to prevent Mary's succession. Lady Jane Grey, 1537-1554, 16 years old, intelligent, learned, devoutly Protestant. Great-granddaughter of Henry VII through his younger daughter Mary. Had been married to Guildford Dudley, Northumberland's son, in May 1553. She was a pawn in Dudley's scheme. The proclamation, July 10, 1553. Jane was proclaimed Queen in London. The council supported her, at least publicly. The proclamation condemned Mary as illegitimate and Catholic. But the plan collapsed. Mary's response: she fled to East Anglia, where she had support. She proclaimed herself the rightful queen. She raised an army, gentry and commoners flocked to her. The kingdom supported her claim. Why Mary won? Legitimacy mattered. Henry VIII will and statute laws supported her claim. Englishmen might dislike Catholicism, but they disliked usurpation more. Dudley was unpopular, seen as greedy and self-serving. Jane was seen as a puppet. Mary represented legal order against a legal coup. The council's betrayal: within days, councillors abandoned Jane. They proclaimed Mary Queen, July 19, 1553. Dudley was arrested, executed August 1553. Jane and her husband were imprisoned in the Tower. Jane's fate initially, Mary was inclined to spare. Her Jane was clearly a puppet. But Wyatt's rebellion, January 1554, Protestant uprising, changed Mary's mind. Jane and Guildford Dudley were executed February 1554. Jane was beheaded on Tower Green within the Tower, privately. She was 16, a victim of dynastic politics she hadn't sought. Edward's legacy. Edward VI's brief reign had lasting consequences. Religious transformation. England became decisively Protestant. Catholic practices were eliminated. The Book of Common Prayer established English worship. Churches were transformed physically and liturgically. Protestant theology was officially defined. But instability, the changes were imposed rapidly and coercively. Many people resented them. Regional rebellions showed discontent. The succession crisis demonstrated Protestant weakness. Unintended consequences. Edward's attempt to preserve Protestantism by altering the succession failed. His sister Mary became queen and reversed everything. The Protestant Revolution was too rapid and too radical to be secure. Personal tragedy. Edward was a brilliant, dutiful, but emotionally stunted boy. His religious zeal made him a fanatic. His brief life was consumed by duty and doctrine. He died young, having never experienced normal childhood or adolescence. Historical assessment. Some historians see Edward as a Protestant hero. Others see him as a priggish fanatic. Most recognize him as a victim, a boy raised to be zealous, used by ambitious men, and dead before he could develop beyond childhood. Edward's reign demonstrated both the possibilities and limitations of imposed religious change. Reforms accomplished in 6 years would require another reign to consolidate, and they would first have to survive 5 years of Catholic restoration. Mary I's reign, 1553-1558, saw England's first undisputed queen regnant attempt to reverse the Protestant Reformation and restore Catholicism. Her failure earned her the epithet Bloody Mary from Protestant historians, though modern scholars recognize her reign's complexity. Mary was neither the simple villain of Protestant propaganda, nor an innocent victim, but a tragic figure whose sincere religious convictions led to persecution and whose political misjudgments doomed her cause. Mary Tudor, the road to the throne, 1516-1553. Mary's life before her accession was marked by suffering and humiliation. Her birth and childhood, 1516-1527, born February 18, 1516, to Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, the only surviving child of their marriage. Initially treasured and well-educated, she learned Latin, French, Spanish, music. A marriage was arranged with Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, her cousin, prestigious but never fulfilled. Until age 11, she was England's heir and Princess of Wales. The Great Matter and its consequences. 1527-1533, Henry's pursuit of annulment destroyed Mary's status. She watched her mother be rejected and humiliated. She was declared illegitimate, no longer princess. She was separated from her beloved mother, never saw Catherine again, before her death in 1536. She was demoted to serve Anne Boleyn's daughter Elizabeth. This treatment scarred Mary psychologically and created burning resentment. Under Henry VIII, 1533-1547, she refused to acknowledge Anne Boleyn as queen or accept her own illegitimacy. She suffered harassment and pressure. Her health deteriorated, possibly stress-related ailments, possibly endometriosis. After Anne Boleyn's execution, she was partially restored to favor by 1544, reinstated in succession. But she remained Catholic while England became Protestant. She attended Mass secretly and corresponded with Charles V. Under Edward VI's 1547-1553, her Catholicism put her in constant danger. Edward and his council tried to force her to adopt Protestantism. She resisted, protected somewhat by Charles V's diplomatic pressure. She lived in semi-isolation, maintaining a Catholic household. She was excluded from court and from her brother, who considered her a heretic. This lifetime of suffering shaped Mary. Deep religious conviction. Catholicism meant loyalty to her mother's memory. Distrust of English Protestants, they had supported her humiliation. Reliance on Spain, Charles V had protected her. Determination to restore the old religion. Psychological issues, possibly paranoia, certainly rigidity. The accession and initial popularity 1553. Mary's accession was initially popular. Her entry into London, August 3, 1553, greeted with joy and celebration. The people supported her legitimate claim. Even Protestants who disliked her Catholicism supported legal succession. She was merciful, initially pardoned many who opposed her, including Cranmer initially. Her coronation October 1, 1553, traditional Catholic ceremony. Magnificent display. Widespread optimism about her reign. Initial policies released Catholic prisoners. Bishops like Gardiner, imprisoned under Edward, restored Catholic bishops to their sees. Celebrated Mass publicly. But initially moved cautiously, didn't immediately persecute Protestants. The challenges: she was England's first undisputed queen. Regnant Matilda had never been crowned. No precedent for female rule. Questions about her authority and capability. She needed to marry to secure succession, but marriage was politically fraught. The marriage question. Mary's decision to marry Philip of Spain was politically disastrous. The options: Edward Courtenay, Earl of Devon, English nobleman with royal blood. A foreign prince. Various European options. Mary chose Philip of Spain, son of Charles V, her cousin and longtime protector. Catholic and powerful. But Spanish and foreign, unpopular choice. The terms negotiated in marriage treaty: Philip would be King of England in title but not authority. He couldn't rule alone or take England into Spanish wars without Parliament's consent. If Mary died without heirs, Philip would have no claim to England. Children would inherit England and the Netherlands. The treaty protected English sovereignty on paper. English opposition: xenophobia, fear of Spanish domination. Economic fears: England becoming Spanish colony. Protestant fears: Spain was Europe's most Catholic power. National pride: Englishmen resented foreign king. Wyatt's rebellion, January-February 1554. The marriage announcement triggered rebellion. Thomas Wyatt, son of the poet, led a rising in Kent, ostensibly about the Spanish marriage. Actually had Protestant religious motivations too. Rebels marched on London, February 1554. They got closer than any rebels since the Wars of the Roses. Mary's courage: she refused to flee. She gave a speech at Guildhall rallying London's support. The rebels were defeated at Ludgate. The aftermath: Wyatt and about 100 rebels were executed. Lady Jane Grey and her husband, previously spared, were now executed. Mary feared they'd be figureheads for Protestant rebellion. Mary's mercy was replaced by paranoia. Elizabeth, Mary's half-sister, was briefly imprisoned in the Tower, suspected of involvement though proof was lacking. The marriage, July 25, 1554. Mary was 38. Philip was 27. She fell in love with him. He was handsome and charming. He found her unattractive and boring, but dutiful about the marriage. It was personally unhappy for Mary. Unrequited love. It was politically disastrous, confirmed English fears of Spanish influence. The Catholic Restoration. Mary systematically reversed the Protestant Reformation. Parliament cooperated, though reluctantly, on some measures. The First Parliament, 1553, repealed Edward VI's religious laws, restored the Mass and Catholic worship, but couldn't restore monastic lands. Too many had profited from their acquisition. The reconciliation with Rome, 1554. Cardinal Reginald Pole arrived as papal legate. Parliament repealed the Act of Supremacy, 1534, and other Reformation legislation. England returned to papal obedience. Pole absolved the nation of schism, November 1554. This was Mary's triumph. England was Catholic again. The heresy laws, 1555. Medieval heresy laws were revived. Burning for heresy became legal again. This enabled the persecution that would earn Mary her epithet Bloody Mary. Religious changes: Latin Mass restored. Protestant clergy deprived of livings. Catholic bishops restored. Married clergy had to separate from wives, causing hardship and resistance. Churches were redecorated, images restored, altars rebuilt. Religious orders began returning, though few monasteries were refounded because lands weren't restored. The problem: many people disliked the changes. Protestant worship had become familiar. The English Bible and prayer book had won hearts. Returning to Latin and traditional practices felt like regression. Crucially, the gentry who had monastic lands wouldn't give them back. The Marian persecutions, 1555-1558. Mary's decision to burn heretics destroyed her reputation. The numbers, about 280 Protestants, were burned at the stake during Mary's reign. This was over about 3.5 years, 1555-1558. Proportionally fewer than some continental persecutions, but concentrated and visible. The victims' high-profile martyrs Thomas Cranmer, October 1556, Archbishop of Canterbury under Henry VIII, and Edward VIII. He had initially recanted signed statements accepting Catholicism, hoping to be spared, but Mary intended to execute him anyway. At his execution, he dramatically renounced his recantations and held his right hand, which had signed the recantations, in the flames first as punishment. His courage became legendary. Hugh Latimer and Nicholas Ridley, October 1555, bishops and reformers, burned together at Oxford. Latimer's famous words to Ridley as they died, "Be of good comfort, Master Ridley, and play the man. We shall this day light such a candle, by God's grace, in England, as I trust shall never be put out." John Hooper, February 1555, Bishop of Gloucester, burned at Gloucester. The execution was botched. The wood was green and wet, so he burned slowly and painfully for 45 minutes. His suffering shocked witnesses. Ordinary martyrs. Most victims were ordinary people, weavers, apprentices, servants. Some were women, including pregnant women. One gave birth in the flames. They came from all social classes, but many were artisans and townsfolk. They died for refusing to accept Catholic theology, especially transubstantiation. The location, Smithfield, London, was the main execution site. Provincial burnings occurred in Oxford, Canterbury, Gloucester, and elsewhere. Public spectacles intended to deter, but often backfired. The propaganda. John Fox's Book of Martyrs, 1563. Fox, Protestant exile during Mary's reign, compiled accounts of the persecutions. Published in Elizabeth's reign as Acts and Monuments, popularly Fox's Book of Martyrs, became one of England's most influential books. Shaped Protestant identity and English anti-Catholicism for centuries. Portrayed Mary as a bloodthirsty tyrant and the martyrs as heroes. Exaggerated and selective, but based on real events. Created the Bloody Mary epithet. Why did Mary burn heretics? Religious conviction. She genuinely believed heresy damned souls. Burning heretics saved them through repentance and protected others. Medieval Catholic theology saw heresy as worse than murder. She saw herself as defending truth and saving souls. Political calculation. She believed terror would force conformity. Earlier persecutions had worked. Henry VIII, limited burnings, continental persecutions. But England was different. Protestantism was more widespread and recent. Personal bitterness. Mary had suffered under Protestant regimes. Protestants had humiliated her and her mother. She may have sought revenge wrapped in religious justification. The backfire. The burnings created Protestant martyrs. Public sympathy often sided with victims. The martyrs' courage inspired others. The persecutions strengthened rather than crushed English Protestantism. The false pregnancy, 1554-1555. One of Mary's greatest personal tragedies, the announcement, November 1554. Mary believed she was pregnant. She showed symptoms of abdominal swelling, cessation of menses, morning sickness. Physicians confirmed pregnancy. Parliament arranged for regency if Mary died in childbirth. Preparations for royal birth began. The waiting, spring 1555. The due date passed April. No baby came. Weeks passed. Physicians were baffled. Mary remained in confinement, secluded, awaiting birth. The realization, summer 1555. By July, it was clear there was no pregnancy. Mary had suffered a phantom pregnancy, pseudocesis, probably stress-induced, possibly caused by ovarian tumor or other medical condition. She was devastated. Philip left England ostensibly for Netherlands business, actually because he found the situation embarrassing and England boring. The impact, national disappointment. A Catholic heir would have secured Mary's work. Personal humiliation for Mary. Seen as divine judgment by Protestants. Mary's health and mental state deteriorated. Another false pregnancy, 1557-1558. Mary again believed she was pregnant. Again, no baby came. This time even she eventually accepted the reality. Foreign policy and war. Mary's alignment with Spain was costly. The war with France, 1557-1558. Philip drew England into Spanish war with France. This violated the marriage treaty's spirit if not letter. Englishmen resented fighting for Spanish interests. The loss of Calais, January 1558. Calais was England's last continental possession held since 1347. French forces captured it. This was a national humiliation. Mary reportedly said, "When I am dead and opened, you shall find Calais lying in my heart." The loss was blamed on Mary and her Spanish policy. The economic costs: war was expensive. Trade was disrupted. Inflation increased. Mary's government was financially stressed. The final year, 1558. Mary's last year saw her health and regime collapsing. Her illness, probably ovarian cancer or uterine cancer. Painful, debilitating, terminal. She knew she was dying. The succession: Mary had to accept Elizabeth as heir despite Elizabeth's Protestantism. No alternative existed. Excluding Elizabeth would cause civil war. Mary made Elizabeth promise to maintain Catholicism. Elizabeth was non-committal. Philip's absence: he visited briefly in 1557, but returned to the continent. Mary wrote pathetic letters begging him to return. He stayed away. The marriage had given him nothing: no heir, only debts and defeat. The persecution continued. Even as Mary lay dying, Protestants were burned. The last martyrs died in November 1558. This cold-bloodedness horrified contemporaries. Her death, November 17, 1558, she died at St. James's Palace. She was 42 years old. She had reigned for 5 years. Cardinal Parr died the same day within hours. Her funeral, Catholic ceremony at Westminster Abbey. Buried near her grandfather Henry VII. Later, Elizabeth was buried in the same vault, ironically. Mary's legacy. Mary's reign was a failure by most measures. Religious failure. The Catholic Restoration didn't take root. The persecutions strengthened Protestantism. Elizabeth immediately reversed Mary's religious policies. Within months of Mary's death, England was Protestant again. Political failure: the Spanish marriage was unpopular and costly. The loss of Calais humiliated the nation. The regime was financially weak. Mary failed to secure the succession: no Catholic heir. Personal tragedy: Mary's life was marked by suffering, humiliation, false pregnancies, unrequited love, illness. She died knowing her life's work would be undone. She was unloved and unmourned by most subjects. But complexity: modern historians have reassessed Mary more sympathetically. She faced genuine challenges: first, Queen regnant, religious divisions, financial problems. She showed personal courage facing Wyatt's rebellion. Her Catholicism was sincere, not just political calculation. The persecutions, while terrible, weren't unusual by 16th century standards. Elizabeth would persecute Catholics, though differently. Her unpopularity owed much to Protestant propaganda. The Bloody Mary epithet, created by Fox and Protestant historians, focused on the persecutions undeniably real, ignored her other policies and personal suffering, made her a caricature villain. But the epithet stuck. Mary I is still Bloody Mary in popular memory. The paradox: Mary was personally pious, dutiful and brave, yet her reign brought suffering to many and ended in failure. She was a tragic figure, raised Catholic in a Protestant age, devoted to a cause that couldn't succeed, and dying knowing her work would be undone. Mary's reign demonstrated that England had become Protestant enough that Catholic restoration was impossible. Too many benefited from Reformation changes, too many resented Spanish influence, and the martyrs' courage had inspired rather than crushed Protestant faith. Her failure cleared the way for her half-sister Elizabeth to create a more lasting religious settlement. Beyond the magnificent courts and dramatic politics, most Tudor English people lived very different lives as farmers, craftsmen, merchants, servants, and laborers, navigating an era of dramatic change, economic transformation, and religious upheaval. Understanding daily life for ordinary people reveals the texture of Tudor society beyond kings and queens. The social hierarchy. Tudor England was strictly hierarchical, the king and royal family at the apex, godlike in authority. The nobility: dukes, earls, barons, perhaps 50-60 noble families. Vast estates, political power, seats in Parliament's House of Lords. Expected to serve the king in peace and war. The gentry: knights, esquires, and gentlemen. The growing class that benefited most from Reformation changes: monastic lands. Served as justices of the peace: local governance. Perhaps 5,000, 10,000 families. The middling sort: prosperous yeoman farmers who owned land. Merchants and professionals: lawyers, physicians. Master craftsmen, growing in wealth and importance. husbandmen and craftsmen, small farmers and skilled workers. The majority of the population. Varying prosperity but generally respectable. Laborers and servants, landless workers, hired by the day or year. Domestic servants. The poorest, free people. The poor, beggars, vagrants, the indigent. Growing numbers during Tudor period. Enclosures displaced many. Seen as a social problem. This hierarchy was considered divinely ordained. Everyone had their place, and challenging it was rebellion against God's order. The rural world. Most Tudor English people lived in rural villages. The village structure, open field agriculture villages, typically had 3 large fields. Each field divided into strips. Families held strips scattered across fields to equalize good and poor land. Fields rotated 1 fallow each year for recovery. Communal agriculture, planting, harvesting, and decisions were collective. Common lands, villagers had rights to graze animals on common pastures, to gather wood from common woodlands, to fish in streams. These common rights were crucial to survival. The manor system. Most villages were part of a manor owned by a lord, nobleman, or gentleman. Tenants paid rent in money or kind to the lord. The lord held courts, manorial courts, for minor disputes. But by Tudor times, manorial power was declining. Enclosure. The great transformation of Tudor agriculture. What was enclosure? Landlords fenced enclosed open fields and commons. They converted land to sheep pasture. Wool was profitable. This displaced small farmers who lost access to land. The scale accelerated during Tudor period, especially 1450–1600. Affected perhaps 25% of agricultural land. Regional variation, worst in Midlands, less in North and West. The impact: increased agricultural efficiency and profit for landowners. Destroyed traditional village communities. Created landless poor forced to become wage laborers or vagrants. Caused rebellions. Kett's Rebellion 1549 had anti-enclosure elements. Contemporary criticism seen as greedy lords destroying communities. Complaints about sheep-eating men. Some government attempts to limit enclosures ineffective. The farming year: spring, March, May, plowing and sowing grain crops. Lambing season, shearing sheep. Long days, hard work. Summer, June, August, haymaking, cutting and drying hay for winter fodder. Grain ripening. Tending animals and crops. Autumn, September, November, harvest, the most critical time, all hands needed. Threshing grain. Slaughtering animals for winter, those that couldn't be fed through winter. Preparing for winter. Winter, December, February, repairs and maintenance. Processing wool, making tools, etc. Less outdoor work but still busy. Hunger and cold, the starving time before spring. Diet and food. Tudor diets varied by class. The wealthy, multiple courses at meals. Meats: beef, mutton, pork, venison, poultry, fish. Elaborate dishes and sauces. Wine and ale. Spices and imported luxuries. Excessive by modern standards. Gout was common among the wealthy. The middling sort more meat than the poor, but not constant. Bread, pottage, thick soup/stew, dairy products. Ale safer than water, which was often contaminated. Seasonal vegetables and fruits. Generally, adequate nutrition. The poor bred the staple wheat bread if affordable, otherwise barley, rye, or oat bread. Pottage made from peas, beans, grains, whatever was available. Very little meat, occasionally salted fish or bacon. Ale weaker and cheaper than what the wealthy drank. Seasonal greens. Frequent malnutrition. Food preservation: salting for meat and fish. Smoking for meat. Drying fruits, grains. Pickling vegetables. No refrigeration meant food spoiled quickly. Feast and famine: good harvests meant plenty. Bad harvests meant hunger or starvation. Grain prices fluctuated wildly. The poor were always one bad harvest from starvation. Housing. Noble households: great houses or castles, stone or brick, multiple rooms, hall, parlors, chambers, chapels, kitchens, elaborate furnishings, tapestries, plate, furniture, many servants, comfort and display. Gentry houses: smaller manor houses, often timber framed, several rooms but not palatial. Some comfort chimneys, glass windows became more common. A few servants, yeomen and middling sort timber framed houses, some stone in stone rich areas. 2 to 4 rooms, typically hall, chamber or 2, kitchen/buttery. Furniture was minimal: a table, benches, a bed or 2 chests. Increasingly, chimneys replaced open hearths. Windows might have glass, a luxury, or oiled cloth. The poor 1 or 2 room cottages. Timber frame with wattle and daub woven sticks plastered with mud/dung mixture. Thatched roofs fire hazard. Dirt floors. Open hearth smoke escaped through holes or door. Minimal furniture, perhaps a table, stools, straw mattresses on floor. Shared with animals, sometimes animals' body heat provided warmth. Heating and light open fires or fireplaces. Wood was becoming scarce, so coal increasingly used in towns. Candles expensive or rushlights cheaper, rushes dipped in fat. Most people went to bed at dark. Candles were too costly for prolonged use. Family life. Marriage. For elites, marriages were arranged for political/economic reasons. For common people, marriages involved more choice, but practical considerations dominated. Average marriage age was mid to late 20s, not as young as popular myth suggests. Premarital pregnancy was common, 30% plus of brides were pregnant at marriage. Childbirth and children. Women typically bore 6-8 children, though child mortality meant fewer survived. Childbirth was dangerous, perhaps 1-2% maternal mortality per birth. Cumulative risk over multiple births was high. Infant and child mortality was appalling. Perhaps 30-40% died before age 5. Children began working young by age 7-8. They did light work. By 12-14, they did adult work. Childhood as we conceive it barely existed for most people. Life expectancy. Those who survived childhood might live to 50-60. Elites lived longer due to better nutrition and less dangerous work. But many died young from disease, accidents, violence, childbirth. For women, old age 60+ was unusual and respected. The household, the basic unit of society, included family, servants, and sometimes apprentices or laborers. The father/master was the head. Patriarchal authority was absolute. Women managed household affairs, but were legally subordinate to husbands. Towns and trade. Tudor England was becoming more urban. London, enormous by English standards, perhaps 50,000, 200,000 during the Tudor period, growing rapidly. Center of trade, politics, culture. Overcrowded, dirty, disease-ridden, but also exciting and full of opportunity. Provincial towns, Norwich, Bristol, York, Exeter, and others, ranged from 5,000 to 20,000 people. Regional trade centers, governed by mayors and corporations. Merchant oligarchies. Market towns, hundreds of small towns, 500 to 3,000 people. Weekly markets where villagers brought produce to sell. Annual fairs, major trading events. Centers of local economy. Guilds and crafts. Guilds controlled most trades, carpenters, weavers, blacksmiths, etc. Apprenticeship system. Boys indentured for 7+ years to learn a trade. Masters, journeymen, and apprentices. Guilds regulated quality, prices, and membership. They provided social welfare for members, support for sick, widows, orphans. Trade and commerce. England's economy was based on wool and cloth exported to continent. Growing merchant class enriched by trade. London's merchants were particularly prosperous. The dissolution of monasteries created opportunities, new lands to buy, new markets. Work and labor. Agricultural labor. Most people were farmers, perhaps 80% of population. Work was seasonal and hard. Long hours during planting and harvest. Less work in winter but still busy. Craft work. Skilled craftsmen, blacksmiths, carpenters, weavers, etc. Long apprenticeships and guild membership required. Pride in craftsmanship. Varied income, some crafts more lucrative than others. Domestic service. Huge numbers worked as servants, perhaps 15-20% of population. Servants lived in their employers' households. Varied from aristocratic households, well treated, to harsh conditions, overworked, underpaid. Service was often temporary. Young people worked as servants before marrying. Day labor. Landless laborers hired by the day. Uncertain work and low pay. The most precarious existence. Growing in numbers due to enclosures. Women's work. Women worked in fields during planting and harvest. They managed households, cooking, cleaning, childcare, making clothes, brewing, preserving food. Endless work. Some worked in markets selling produce, dairy, poultry. Some worked as servants or in textile trades. Women's work was essential but low paid and undervalued. Religion in daily life. The parish church, the center of community life. Everyone was expected to attend Sunday services. Baptisms, marriages, and funerals marked life stages. Church bells regulated daily life, calling to services, marking hours. The Reformation's impact on ordinary people. The changes. Latin Mass replaced with English service. Images and decorations removed, churches became bare. Saints' days and pilgrimages eliminated. Monasteries dissolved, no longer provided charity, hospitality, employment. English Bible available for those who could read. The reactions, many resented the changes. Attachments to traditional religion were strong. Some welcomed reform, especially those influenced by Protestant preaching. Most adapted, pragmatically followed whatever the law required. Regional variations, north and west remained more Catholic, south and east more Protestant. Religious observance, church attendance was legally required, fines for non-attendance. But quality of participation varied. People gossiped, slept, or daydreamed during services. Genuine piety coexisted with formalism. Popular beliefs alongside official religion, folk beliefs persisted. Belief in witchcraft, fairies, ghosts, omens, cunning folk, local healers/fortune tellers were consulted. Magic and religion intermingled in popular practice. Education and literacy. Formal education, grammar schools educated boys ages 7-14 typically in Latin, rhetoric, classical authors. Universities, Oxford and Cambridge trained clergy, lawyers, and physicians. But most people received no formal education. Literacy low by modern standards, perhaps 20-30% of men, 5-10% of women could read by end of Tudor period. Growing during Tudor period, Protestant emphasis on Bible reading promoted literacy. Class and gender disparities, gentlemen generally literate, laborers usually not, women less literate than men. Oral culture, most culture was oral stories, ballads, proverbs. Memory was crucial, people memorized vast amounts. Public readings and sermons brought written culture to the illiterate. Leisure and entertainment. Festivals, May Day spring celebration with dancing maypoles. Midsummer bonfires, festivities. Harvest festivals celebrating successful harvest. Christmas, 12 days of feasting, though the Reformation limited some traditions. These festivals involved whole communities. Alehouses and taverns, centers of male sociability. Drinking, gaming, conversation. Sometimes disorderly, authorities worried about alehouses as sources of crime and disorder. Sports and games, football, a violent, chaotic game played by whole villages. Wrestling, cudgeling, stick fighting, archery. Blood sports, bear baiting, cock fighting. Card games, dice, board games. Plays and performances, traveling players performed in towns and villages. By late Tudor period, permanent theaters in London. Mystery plays, religious dramas suppressed by Reformation. Secular plays and entertainments growing. Music, singing and instrumental music, lutes, viols, recorders. Folk songs and ballads. Dancing at festivals and celebrations. Crime and punishment. Common crimes, theft, most common crime prosecuted. Assault and murder, fairly common. Sexual offenses, adultery, fornication, though prosecuted inconsistently. Vagrancy, being poor and wandering, increasingly criminalized. Punishment, execution, hanging for serious crimes like murder, burglary, serious theft, branding, whipping, time in stocks or pillory, public humiliation. Fines. Execution rates were high, hundreds executed annually even in medium-sized towns. Justice, quarter sessions, local courts run by justices of the peace. Assizes, circuit courts for serious crimes. Justice was harsh but not arbitrary, legal process was followed. But justice was not equal, gentry could often escape consequences that destroyed commoners. The poor law, growing problem of poverty, enclosures, population growth. Early attempts at poor relief, 1536, 1572, 1601, poor laws. Parishes required to support their own poor. Distinction between deserving poor, old, sick, orphans, and undeserving poor, able-bodied, unemployed. Daily life in Tudor England was hard, often short, and shaped by forces economic, religious, political that common people couldn't control. But within these constraints, people built lives, families, and communities, adapting to change while maintaining continuities with the medieval past. The texture of ordinary existence, work, family, food, faith, and fellowship persisted through the dramatic upheavals at the top of society. Here we pause once more in our exploration of Tudor England. We have witnessed Edward VI's brief, intense Protestant revolution that transformed England in 6 years, but proved too radical to survive his death. We have seen Mary I's tragic attempt to restore Catholicism, a sincere but doomed effort that ended in failure and earned her the epithet Bloody Mary. We have also descended from the heights of court and politics to explore the daily lives of ordinary Tudor people, farmers and craftsmen, servants and laborers who lived through these extraordinary times while navigating the timeless challenges of work, family, and survival. As you drift towards sleep, imagine Tudor England in all its complexity, a village church stripped of its images and decorations, a market town bustling with trade, a family sitting by a fire in a timber-framed cottage, a field being enclosed against the protests of displaced farmers, and throughout it all, the awareness that religion, politics, and economics were transforming their world in ways both exciting and terrifying. When we conclude our journey, we will explore the cultural flowering of the Tudor age, the literature, art, and music that made this era one of English history's most creative periods. We will briefly preview Elizabeth I's reign and the golden age that would follow these turbulent decades. We will reflect on what the Tudor period teaches us about power, religion, personality, and historical change. And we will consider why 5 centuries later, we remain fascinated by Henry VIII, his 6 wives, and the court that shaped the modern world. But for now, rest. The Tudor world has passed, but its legacy remains in English law and religion, in the language shaped by the King James Bible and Shakespeare, in the buildings and ruins that dot the English landscape, and in the enduring fascination with an era when one king's desires reshaped a nation. The Tudor period was not merely an age of political drama and religious upheaval, it was also one of England's most creative cultural eras. The English Renaissance, arriving later than its Italian counterpart, flourished under the Tudors, producing literature, art, music, and architecture that would influence Western culture for centuries. Understanding Tudor culture reveals how artistic and intellectual achievements emerged from and responded to the period's turbulent politics and religious transformations. The English Renaissance. The Renaissance rebirth began in Italy in the 14th century, but reached England fully only in the Tudor period. What was the Renaissance? Classical revival renewed interest in Greek and Roman literature, philosophy, and art. Study of classical texts in original languages, not just Latin translations. Imitation of classical models in writing and art. Belief that ancient wisdom could improve contemporary society. Humanism, educational philosophy emphasizing classical learning, rhetoric, and ethics. Focus on human potential and achievement while remaining Christian. Promoted literacy, learning, and individual development. Key figures: Erasmus of Rotterdam, Thomas More, John Colet. Artistic innovation, new techniques in painting, sculpture, and architecture. Emphasis on realism, perspective, and human form. Patronage by wealthy individuals and institutions. Scientific curiosity, observation, and experimentation. Challenging traditional authorities. Though modern science hadn't fully emerged, Renaissance thinking laid groundwork. How the Renaissance came to England. Italian influences, English travelers to Italy, merchants, students, diplomats. Italian artists and scholars brought to England, especially by Henry VII and Henry VIII. Imported books and artworks, royal patronage. Henry VII and Elizabeth of York supported learning and arts. Henry VIII was highly cultured musician, poet, scholar. Edward V received humanist education. Elizabeth I was exceptionally learned, knew Latin, Greek, French, Italian. Educational reforms, grammar schools promoted classical learning. Universities incorporated humanist curriculum. Private tutors for elite families taught Renaissance subjects. Printing. William Caxton established England's first printing press, 1476, just before Tudor period. Printing spread ideas rapidly. Books became more accessible, though still expensive. Tudor literature. The Tudor period produced some of English literature's greatest works. Early Tudor poetry. John Skelton c. 1460–1529, tutor to the young Henry VIII. Satirical poet who mocked Cardinal Wolsey. Wrote in a distinctive, energetic style. Speak, Parrot and other works criticized court corruption. Sir Thomas Wyatt 1503–1542, courtier, diplomat, and poet. Introduced the sonnet to English literature from Italian models. Love poetry, possibly inspired by Anne Boleyn. He may have been in love with her before Henry. Whoso list to hunt, possibly about Anne. I leave off therefore. Since in a net I seek to hold the wind. Survived Henry's court despite dangerous proximity to Anne Boleyn. Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey 1517–1547, aristocratic poet, son of the Duke of Norfolk. Introduced blank verse unrhymed iambic pentameter to English. Translated parts of Virgil's Aeneid. Executed by Henry VIII just before the king's death. His innovations influenced later Elizabethan poetry. Court poetry's characteristics, often circulated in manuscript, not printed. Printing poetry was considered vulgar. Used classical forms and themes. Frequently had coded political meanings. Love poetry followed Petrarchan conventions, idealized, unattainable, beloved. Religious literature. William Tyndale's Bible translation, 1520s–1530s, translated New Testament and parts of Old Testament into English. Beautiful, accessible prose. Influential on later English language and literature. Tyndale was executed 1536, but his translation lived on. The Book of Common Prayer 1549, revised 1552. Thomas Cranmer's liturgical masterpiece. Shaped English prose style. Phrases entered common language. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, till death us do part, etc. Fox's Book of Martyrs 1563, John Fox's account of Protestant martyrs. Enormously influential, second only to Bible in many Protestant households. Shaped English Protestant identity. Vivid, propagandistic, but based on real events. Theological works. Thomas More's Controversies with Lutherans. Protestant treatises by Cranmer, Latimer, Ridley. Catholic works by Gardiner and others. The Reformation made theology a matter of life and death, producing passionate religious writing. Historical and political writing. Thomas More's Utopia 1516, Imaginary Ideal Commonwealth. Social and political criticism wrapped in fiction. Utopia means no place. A pun also sounds like good place. Critiqued contemporary society's injustices. Ironic and complex. Scholars still debate More's exact meaning. Chronicles. Edward Hall's Chronicle of Henry VIII reign. Raphael Holinshed's Chronicles of England, Scotland, and Ireland 1577. These provided source material for later dramatists, especially Shakespeare. The beginnings of English drama. Medieval religious drama declined. Mystery plays. Biblical stories suppressed by Reformation. Miracle plays. Saints' lives also suppressed. These had been popular communal entertainments. Secular drama emerged. School plays in Latin and English at grammar schools and universities. Court entertainments. Masques and interludes. The first professional theaters appeared late in Tudor period 1570s, 1580s. Early Tudor plays, morality plays, allegorical personified virtues and vices. Interludes. Short dramatic entertainments. Classical influences. Seneca's tragedies, Roman comedies. The groundwork for Elizabethan theatrical explosion. Shakespeare, Marlowe, Jonson was laid in the Tudor period. Tudor art and architecture. Painting. English painting was less distinguished than continental art, but important works survive. Hans Holbein the Younger, 1497–1543, German artist who worked at Henry VIII court from 1536. Created iconic portraits of Henry VIII, his wives, and courtiers. The famous portrait of Henry VIII, legs apart, imposing, magnificent, is based on Holbein's lost original. Portraits of Thomas More, Thomas Cromwell, Anne of Cleves, and many others. Miniatures. Tiny portraits on vellum. Exquisite detail. Holbein's work defined how we visualize Tudor England. Nicholas Hilliard c. 1547–1619, the great English miniaturist. Worked primarily in Elizabeth's reign but represents Tudor artistic tradition. Tiny, jewel-like portraits. Captured Elizabethan courtly ideals. Characteristics of Tudor portraits. Emphasis on rich clothing and jewels displaying wealth and status. Symbols and emblems conveying identity, allegiances, virtues. Relatively flat, two-dimensional compared to Italian Renaissance depth. Realism in faces though often idealized. Architecture. Tudor architecture was distinctive and enduring. The Tudor style, timber framing, black and white half-timbered buildings, oak frames filled with wattle and daub or brick. Decorative patterns in timber. Iconic English look. Many survive, especially in towns like Chester. Brick buildings. Brick became more common, previously rare in England. Hampton Court Palace is a magnificent example. Red brick with stone dressings. Perpendicular Gothic, late Gothic style with vertical emphasis. Large windows with intricate tracery. King's College Chapel, Cambridge, completed early Tudor period, is supreme example. This traditional style coexisted with Renaissance influences. Renaissance influences increasing later in Tudor period, classical symmetry and proportion. Classical decorative elements, columns, pediments. Longleat House 1570s shows emerging Renaissance style. Full classical architecture would dominate under later Stuarts. Great houses and palaces. Hampton Court Palace, originally built by Cardinal Wolsey, seized by Henry VIII and expanded. Magnificent example of Tudor architecture. Great Hall, royal apartments, gardens. Survives today, partly Tudor, partly later Baroque additions. Nonsuch Palace, Henry VIII, most extravagant building project. Fantastically decorated with Renaissance motifs, named Nonsuch because no other could match it. Destroyed in 17th century, only descriptions survive. Hardwicke Hall, 1590s, late Tudor. Hardwicke Hall, more glass than wall, enormous windows. Glass was extremely expensive, displaying wealth. Symmetrical Renaissance design, built by Bess of Hardwicke, one of England's richest women. Features of Tudor houses: long galleries for exercise and display. Great halls for communal dining and entertaining. Increasing privacy, more separate rooms. Elaborate gardens, not gardens, fountains, topiary. Display of wealth and status. Music. Tudor England had a rich musical culture. Sacred music. The Chapel Royal, the King's musical establishment. Some of Europe's finest musicians. Composed and performed elaborate polyphonic music. Composers: Thomas Tallis c. 1505, 1585 served Henry VIII, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I. Composed in both Catholic and Protestant styles, adapting to religious changes. Spem in alium 40 part motet, an astonishing achievement. His music is still performed and admired. William Beheaded c. 1540-1623, Tallis's student and colleague, Catholic in Protestant England but protected by Elizabeth. Composed masses, motets, and keyboard music. One of England's greatest composers. John Taverner c. 1490-1545, composed magnificent masses and other sacred works. Western Wind Mass is particularly famous. Characteristics: polyphony, multiple independent melodic lines interwoven. Text setting that enhanced the words. Under Protestantism, English text replaced Latin, creating new compositional challenges. Secular music: the lute, the most popular instrument for courtly music. Accompanied songs, played solo music. Every gentleman was expected to play. Madrigals, part songs usually for 4-6 voices. Sophisticated polyphony. Pastoral and love themes. Italian origin but enthusiastically adopted in England. Popular songs and ballads, folk songs. Street ballads, topical songs, often satirical. Broadside ballads printed on single sheets, sold cheaply. Dance music, court dances, pavanes, galliards, almains. Country dances. Dancing was essential courtly skill. Henry VIII as composer. Henry composed songs and instrumental pieces. Pastime with good company is his most famous, probably some attributions are disputed. He played multiple instruments. His court was a center of musical culture. Education and learning. The Tudor period saw educational expansion, grammar schools, royal foundations. Henry VIII founded or refounded several grammar schools using wealth from dissolved monasteries. Edward Vichy continued this. Many King Edward Vichy grammar schools still exist. These schools educated boys ages 7-14, typically in Latin, rhetoric, classical authors. Curriculum: Latin grammar, rigorous drilling. Classical authors: Cicero, Virgil, Ovid, etc. Rhetoric and composition. Some Greek. Emphasis on eloquence and moral philosophy. The universities Oxford and Cambridge were transformed. College foundations: new colleges founded. Christ Church at Oxford by Wolsey/Henry VIII. Trinity at Cambridge by Henry VIII. Existing colleges reformed and expanded. Curriculum changes: humanist studies incorporated. Greek added to traditional Latin curriculum. Theology remained central. Universities trained clergy. Law and medicine also taught. Famous scholars: Erasmus taught at Cambridge briefly. John Colet, William Grosson, Thomas Linacre, leading humanists. Many bishops and officials were university educated. Private education for the elite, tutors for noble and gentry children. Daughters of elite families received education unusual for the time. Elizabeth I, Lady Jane Grey, Catherine Parr, all highly educated women. Books and printing. The impact of printing books became more accessible, still expensive, but cheaper than manuscripts. More titles available. Ideas spread faster. Literacy increased, perhaps 20–30% of men literate by end of Tudor period, up from 10% earlier. Driven by Protestantism, reading Bible encouraged, and economic needs, merchants needed literacy. Women's literacy lower, 5–10%, but growing. Libraries. Royal library expanded. Universities built libraries. Some wealthy individuals had substantial book collections. But dissolution of monasteries destroyed monastic libraries. Enormous cultural loss. Scientific and medical developments. The Tudor period saw early steps toward modern science. Medicine, still based on ancient authorities. Galen, Hippocrates, theory of four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Treatment focused on restoring humoral balance. Bloodletting, purging, herbal remedies. But some advances. Andreas Vesalius's anatomy, 1543, challenged Galen. Some English physicians studied on continent, bringing new knowledge. The Royal College of Physicians, founded 1518, regulated medical practice. Herbal medicine, extensive knowledge of herbs and plants. Some remedies were effective. Willow bark for pain contained salicylic acid, precursor to aspirin. Others were useless or harmful. Plague and disease, periodic plague outbreak, sweating sickness, bubonic plague. No effective treatments. Quarantine and flight were only real defenses. Navigation and exploration. English maritime expansion began in Tudor period. John Cabot, 1497, under Henry VII, explored North America, Newfoundland. Established English claims to New World. Later expeditions, primarily Elizabethan, Francis Drake, Walter Raleigh, Martin Frobisher. Search for Northwest Passage. Beginnings of English colonization. Navigation improvements, better maps and charts. Improved instruments, astrolabes, cross staffs. Mathematical navigation. Mathematics and astronomy. Robert Record, c. 1512–1558, Welsh mathematician. Wrote mathematics textbooks in English, making math more accessible. Invented the equals sign. John Dee, 1527, 1608, 9th mathematician, astronomer, astrologer, and occultist. Advised Elizabeth I. Huge library, largest private library in England. Bridged Renaissance learning and emerging scientific thought. Astronomy, still based on Ptolemaic system, Earth-centered. Copernicus's heliocentric theory, 1543, was known but controversial. Astrology and astronomy were intertwined. The Tudor cultural achievement. The Tudor period's cultural legacy. Literature, the sonnet, blank verse, and other poetic forms established. English prose developed. Bible, prayer book, Moore's writings. Drama's foundations laid. Elizabethan theatre would follow. Art, iconic images of the Tudors preserved. Holbein's portraits. Architectural style that defines Englishness for many. Music, a golden age of English music. Tallies, Beheaded, and others created masterpieces. Learning, educational expansion. Humanist values promoted. Literacy and learning valued even if imperfectly realized. Language, the English language was enriched and standardized. Classical learning influenced vocabulary. The Bible and prayer book shaped prose style. The paradox, this cultural flowering occurred during religious upheaval and political violence. The same courts that produced beautiful music and poetry also sent people to the scaffold. Henry VIII was both cultured Renaissance prince and brutal tyrant. Tudor culture combined magnificence and savagery, learning and intolerance. Elizabeth I's reign, 1558–1603, would become England's golden age, an era of cultural flowering, national confidence, and relative prosperity. Though Elizabeth's reign technically lies beyond our focus on Henry VIII and the earlier Tudors, understanding the culmination of the Tudor dynasty helps us see the long-term consequences of the religious and political transformations we've explored. Elizabeth's early life, 1533–1558. Elizabeth Tudor lived through extraordinary danger before becoming queen. Her birth, September 7, 1533, daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Her birth was a disappointment. Henry wanted a son. Declared illegitimate after Anne's execution, 1536. Her title changed from princess to Lady Elizabeth. Her childhood raised away from court, as was normal for royal children. Excellent education tutors including Roger Ascham learned Latin, Greek, French, Italian. Protestant upbringing crucial to her later religious policy. Emotionally scarred by mother's execution and father's treatment. Under Edward VI 1547-1553 partially restored to succession Third Succession Act 1544. Lived quietly, avoided factional politics. Maintained Protestant faith. Narrowly avoided scandal. Thomas Seymour, Catherine Parr's widower, pursued her inappropriately after Catherine's death. Scandal damaged both. Under Mary I 1553-1558 in grave danger as Protestant heir, potential focus for Protestant plots. Implicated in Wyatt's Rebellion 1554. Imprisoned in the Tower, feared execution. Interrogated but denied involvement. Eventually released but under surveillance. Had to outwardly conform to Catholicism while preserving Protestant identity. These experiences shaped Elizabeth. Learned to dissimulate, hide true feelings, say what was expedient. Developed political caution, taking risks could mean death. Understood religious division's dangers. Cultivated useful ambiguity, keeping options open. Survived when many didn't. The Accession, November 17, 1558. Mary I's death made Elizabeth queen. Her response reportedly quoted Psalm 118 in Latin. A domino factum est elud, et est mirabile in oculis nostris. This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvelous in our eyes. She knew she had survived against odds. Initial challenges. Religious settlement. England was Catholic. She was Protestant. Financial problems. Mary's wars left debts. Marriage question. Pressure to marry and produce heir. International threats. France and Spain both potentially hostile. Legitimacy questions. Catholics considered her illegitimate. Her advantages. Legitimate by English law. Third Succession Act. Protestant support. Enthusiastic. Popular relief. Mary's reign had been unhappy. Intelligent, educated, and politically astute. Learned from her sister's mistakes. The Elizabethan religious settlement 1559. Elizabeth created a moderate Protestant church. The Act of Supremacy 1559. Elizabeth became supreme governor, not supreme head, subtly less offensive to those uncomfortable with female church leadership. Papal authority rejected. Bishops had to swear oath to Elizabeth. The Act of Uniformity 1559, Book of Common Prayer revised 1559 version based on 1552, but slightly more conservative. Required in all churches. Attendance at Church of England services mandatory. The settlement's character Protestant theology, but some Catholic-looking ceremonies retained. The via media middle way between Catholicism and radical Protestantism. Deliberate ambiguity allowing different interpretations. Emphasis on outward conformity, not internal belief. The formula: Catholics who outwardly conformed were tolerated, though later persecutions occurred when political threats arose. Puritans, radical Protestants, who wanted more thorough reform, were frustrated but mostly contained. The Church of England became a distinctive institution, Protestant, but with Catholic heritage. The marriage question. Elizabeth's refusal to marry was one of her reign's defining features. The pressure to marry. Everyone assumed she would. Queens needed husbands. Kingdoms needed heirs. Parliament repeatedly petitioned her to marry. Suitors included foreign princes and English nobles. The suitors: Philip II of Spain, Mary I's widower. Elizabeth refused. Eric XIV of Sweden. Archduke Charles of Austria. Francois, Duke of Anjou, French prince. She came closest to marrying him. Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, her favorite, rumored to be her lover, though evidence is ambiguous. Why didn't she marry? Personal reasons. Possible psychological trauma. Her mother was executed. Several stepmothers suffered. Desire to maintain power. Husbands would expect authority. Perhaps genuinely preferred independence. Political reasons. Foreign marriage would create opposition, as Mary I's Spanish marriage had. English marriage would create factional jealousy, elevating one noble family over others. Marriage might mean pregnancy and childbirth. Dangerous. Her mother died. Several stepmothers died. Strategic reasons. Unmarried, she could dangle marriage prospects to various suitors, keeping diplomatic options open. The uncertainty kept courtiers and factions competing for favor. She could be England's virgin queen, creating unique mystique. The result: she never married. No direct heir. Succession would pass to Scottish line. James V of Scotland. son of Mary Queen of Scots, created anxiety but also gave her unique position. The threats and triumphs. Elizabeth's reign faced numerous challenges but achieved remarkable successes. Mary Queen of Scots, Elizabeth's cousin and Catholic claimant to English throne, forced to flee Scotland 1568, took refuge in England. Elizabeth kept her imprisoned for 19 years. Focus of Catholic plots. Eventually executed 1587 for plotting against Elizabeth. The Spanish Armada 1588. Philip II of Spain attempted to invade England. Massive fleet, 130 ships, 30,000 men. English navy and weather defeated the Armada. Became legendary English victory, though wars with Spain continued. Religious conflicts, Catholic plots, Redolphy plot, Throckmorton plot, Babington plot, all aiming to assassinate Elizabeth. Persecution of Catholics increased, though less bloody than Mary I's persecutions of Protestants. Conflicts with Puritans who wanted more radical reform. Exploration and commerce. Francis Drake circumnavigated the globe 1577-1580. Walter Raleigh attempted colonization of Virginia, unsuccessful, but established English claims. Trade expanded. Levant Company, East India Company founded. England became a maritime power. Cultural flowering. The Elizabethan theatre. William Shakespeare 1564-1616, the greatest playwright in English, perhaps in any language. Christopher Marlowe, Ben Jonson, and others. Public theatres. The Globe, the Rose, etc. Drama for all classes. Poetry. Edmund Spenser, The Faerie Queene, epic poem celebrating Elizabeth. Philip Sidney, Walter Raleigh, and others. Music. William Byatt, Thomas Tallis, continued from earlier. Madrigals, keyboard music, church music. The Elizabethan age became synonymous with English cultural achievement. The Virgin Queen mythology. Elizabeth cultivated a unique image. Gloriana, the Virgin Queen wedded to England. Quasi-religious imagery borrowing from Marian devotion redirected to Elizabeth. Portraits showing her magnificently dressed, ageless, powerful. Cult of personality. The symbolism, version/fertility paradoxes, virgin but mother of her people. Phoenix reborn from ashes. Astrea, goddess of justice, returned to earth. The reality vis. The image Elizabeth aged portraits became increasingly unrealistic, showing eternally young queen. She used cosmetics, heavily white lead makeup, toxic. She was shrewd, calculating, and sometimes ruthless, not just the glorified image. But the mythology worked, created loyalty and national unity. Inspired artists and poets. Made Elizabeth into a legend. The succession and death. Elizabeth's refusal to name an heir created anxiety. The succession question. As she aged, succession became critical. She refused to name an heir, feared becoming irrelevant if she did. James VI of Scotland, son of Mary Queen of Scots, was the likely candidate, descended from Henry VII through his daughter Margaret. Robert Cecil, chief minister, secretly corresponded with James, preparing smooth transition. Her final years, increasing melancholy and health problems. Essex rebellion 1601. Robert Devereux, Earl of Essex, attempted coup, failed and was executed. Financial problems. War weariness, long wars with Spain and in Ireland. Her death March 24, 1603 at Richmond Palace. She was 69 years old, very old for the time. She had reigned for 44 years, longer than any English monarch, except her grandfather Henry VII, and longer than most. On her deathbed, she reportedly indicated James of Scotland should succeed, though evidence is unclear. She may have been too weak to speak. Her funeral, magnificent ceremony at Westminster Abbey. She was buried in the same vault as her half-sister Mary I. Her tomb bears the inscription praising her reign. James V of Scotland became James I of England, uniting the crowns, though not the kingdom's full union came in 1707. Elizabeth's legacy. Elizabeth I's reign secured the Tudor achievements. Religious settlement. The Church of England as established by Elizabeth persisted with modifications to the present. England became definitively Protestant. Religious tolerance by 16th century standards prevented the worst excesses of religious war. National identity. England developed a distinct Protestant national identity. Victory over Spain built national confidence. Cultural flowering created shared cultural heritage. Political stability. After the turbulence of Henry VIII, Edward VI and Mary I, Elizabeth provided stability. Strong monarchy but working with Parliament. Foundations for constitutional development. Economic development, trade expansion. Early colonialism. Growing merchant class and prosperity though unevenly distributed. Cultural achievement, Shakespeare and Elizabethan theater. Poetry, music, and arts. English language enriched and celebrated. But problems remained: religious divisions, Catholics and Puritans both dissatisfied. Social inequalities. No direct heir succession passed to Scottish line. Financial problems. Elizabeth was neither the saintly Gloriana of mythology, nor simply a clever politician, but a complex, intelligent, and remarkably successful monarch who guided England through religious conflict to become a major European power and cultural center. The Tudor dynasty, 1485-1603, fundamentally transformed England politically, religiously, socially, and culturally. Understanding their legacy requires examining both immediate consequences and long-term impacts that echo to the present. Political legacy. The centralized monarchy, the Tudors created a stronger, more centralized state. Royal supremacy. The king/queen became supreme governor of the church. This united political and religious authority. It created a more powerful monarchy than medieval predecessors. The bureaucracy. Thomas Cromwell's administrative reforms created more efficient government. Professionalized civil service officials appointed by merit, not just birth. Systematic taxation and financial management. The machinery of the early modern state. Parliament's role. Paradoxically, the Tudors both strengthened monarchy and parliament. The Reformation Parliament, 1529-1536, used parliament to break with Rome. This established precedent that major constitutional changes required parliamentary approval. Gave parliament a role in religious settlement. Financial dependence. The crown needed parliamentary taxation. This gave parliament leverage, created ongoing tension between royal prerogative and parliamentary privilege. The legacy. Later Stuart kings would clash with Parliament over these tensions. The English Civil War, 1642-1651, partly resulted from unresolved Tudor-era constitutional questions. Modern parliamentary democracy has roots in Tudor developments. The Privy Council developed into an effective executive body, managed day-to-day governance, staffed increasingly by professional administrators rather than just nobles. Local government justices of the peace became crucial. The gentry governed localities. This created a partnership between crown and local elites. Religious legacy. The Church of England. The Tudor Reformation created a unique religious institution: Anglican identity, Protestant theology with Catholic ceremonial elements. The Via Media, middle way between Rome and Geneva. Emphasis on order, tradition, and royal authority. The consequences for England. England became a Protestant nation, though Catholic minorities persisted. Religious conflicts would continue. Catholic plots, Puritan dissent, civil war, partly religious. But gradual development of religious tolerance, slower than we'd like, but eventual. For the world, Anglicanism spread with British Empire. The Anglican Communion today includes millions worldwide. Episcopal Church USA, Church of Australia, etc. The Bible in English. Tyndale's and later translations made scripture accessible. The King James Bible, 1611, just post-Tudor, built on Tudor translations. English language and literature profoundly influenced. Religious division. The Reformation created lasting divisions: Catholic-Protestant conflict, European wars of religion, English conflicts with Catholic powers, Spain, France. Internal divisions, recusants, Puritans, conformists. Sectarianism, the proliferation of Protestant denominations. Debates over church governance, theology, worship. These debates shaped Western thought. But also toleration. Eventually, the impossibility of enforcing uniformity led to toleration. Tudor-era conflicts contributed to eventual acceptance of religious diversity. Social and economic legacy. The dissolution of the monasteries. This had enormous, long-term consequences. Land redistribution created a new landowning gentry class. These families dominated local politics and economy for centuries. Many of England's great country houses sit on former monastic lands. Social welfare of destroyed medieval charitable infrastructure required new approaches to poverty. The Poor Laws, culminating in 1601 Act, created parish-based welfare. This system persisted for over 200 years. Cultural loss, monastic libraries destroyed, irreplaceable manuscripts lost. Architectural destruction, though ruins remain as romantic symbols. Economic transformation, agricultural capitalism, enclosures converting common land to private pasture. Shift toward market-oriented agriculture. Displacement of peasants creating wage labor force. Commercial expansion, growing merchant class. Expansion of trade, domestic and international. Early colonial ventures. London's rise as commercial center. Inflation and wages, price revolution, prices rose faster than wages. Debasement of coinage under Henry VIII and Edward VI. Hardship for wage earners and those on fixed incomes. Social mobility increased compared to medieval period. Education and commerce offered routes to advancement. But hierarchical society remained, birth still mattered enormously. Cultural and intellectual legacy. The English language, the Tudor period shaped modern English vocabulary expansion. Classical learning introduced Latin and Greek words. Contact with other languages, French, Italian, Spanish. Neologisms, new coinages by writers. The Bible's influence, phrases and expressions from English Bible entered common speech. Prose style influenced by biblical translation. Literary flowering, the foundations for Shakespeare and later English literature. Standardization, printing promoted uniform spelling and grammar. Education and literacy, grammar school expansion. Increased literacy, though still minority of population. Education valued even if access was unequal. The book trade, printing presses multiplied. More books available. Reading culture developed. Art and architecture, the Tudor-style timber-framed buildings still defining Englishness. Great houses and palaces, architectural heritage, Hampton Court, many surviving buildings. Visual culture, Holbein's portraits preserve Tudor images. Miniatures, quintessentially English art form. Music, tallies, Beheaded and others created lasting works. Choral tradition established. Scientific thought, early steps toward scientific revolution. Questioning of traditional authorities. Empirical observation valued. International legacy. The English Reformation's global impact, religious diversity, England's break from Rome was one of several Reformation movements. It contributed to European religious pluralism. Anglican communion spread globally with British Empire. Political thought, debates over royal supremacy, parliamentary power, and religious authority influenced later constitutional developments. English political ideas, limited monarchy, rule of law influenced global democratic movements. Colonial expansion, the beginnings, Tudor exploration laid groundwork for later empire. Cabot's voyages, Drake's circumnavigation, Raleigh's colonial attempts, established English claims to North America. The long-term consequences, British Empire would reshape global politics, economics, culture. English language spread worldwide. Cultural influences, law, government, sports, etc., but also colonialism's injustices and exploitation. The Tudor dynasty's influence extended far beyond England. The religious, political, and cultural changes they initiated had global consequences. The dark side of the legacy. Honesty requires acknowledging the costs, violence and persecution. Thousands executed for treason, heresy, and other offenses. The burnings under Mary I. The executions under Henry VIII, including 2 queens. Religious intolerance, both Catholic and Protestant. Social disruption, enclosures displaced peasants. Dissolution destroyed communities. Economic changes created poverty and hardship for many. Inequality, cultural achievements benefited elites primarily. Most people remained illiterate, poor and powerless. Women's opportunities were limited. Social mobility was real but limited. Cultural destruction, monastic libraries burned. Medieval art and architecture destroyed. Irreplaceable heritage lost. Religious division, the Reformation created lasting conflicts. Wars, persecutions and hatreds. These divisions persist in some forms today. The Tudor legacy is thus mixed, extraordinary achievements coexisting with brutal costs. Why the Tudors still fascinate? 5 centuries later, the Tudor period remains endlessly compelling. Drama and personality, Henry's 6 wives and dramatic character. Court intrigues, executions, rebellions. Colorful personalities, Wolsey, More, Cromwell, Elizabeth, etc. High stakes, literally life and death. Religious convictions people died for. Political maneuvers that changed history. Transformative change, the Reformation reshaped Western civilization. The Tudors transformed England fundamentally. We see the origins of the modern world. Human stories: love, ambition, courage, betrayal, survival. Relatable emotions in extraordinary circumstances. Tragic figures: Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Mary I. Cultural achievements: Shakespeare and Elizabethan theater. Music, poetry, art. The richness of the cultural flowering. Mystery and debate: historical controversies. Was Anne Boleyn guilty? Did Henry suffer brain injury? Why didn't Elizabeth marry? New evidence and interpretations. The joy of historical detective work. Accessibility: abundant sources, documents, buildings, portraits. Dramatic locations: Tower of London, Hampton Court. Popular culture: novels, TV shows, films. The Tudors offer everything a compelling historical period should: drama, significance, complexity, and enduring relevance. And so we come to the end of our journey through Tudor England, from Henry VIII golden youth to his bloated, paranoid final years, from the break with Rome to the Protestant Revolution, from the dissolution of the monasteries to the cultural flowering, from 6 wives divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived, to the complex figures of Edward VE, Mary I, and Elizabeth I, and from the magnificent courts to the daily lives of ordinary people navigating extraordinary times. What have we learned? We have learned that personality matters in history. Henry VIII desires for a male heir, for Anne Boleyn, for supremacy reshaped England and influenced world history. One man's combination of intelligence, charm, egotism, cruelty, and conviction changed the religious and political landscape of Europe. Elizabeth I's very different personality: cautious, calculating, image-conscious, created stability and prosperity after decades of turbulence. We have learned that ideas have consequences. The Protestant Reformation was about theological disputes, transubstantiation, justification, papal authority, but these abstract debates led to executions, wars, and the transformation of societies. What people believed about God, salvation, and religious authority mattered so intensely, they were willing to kill and die for it. We have learned that structural forces and individual agency interact. The Reformation happened because of broad historical trends: the Renaissance, printing, national monarchies, criticism of church corruption, but also because particular individuals, Luther, Henry VIII, Cranmer, etc., made specific choices. History is neither purely structural nor purely biographical, but an interaction of impersonal forces and personal decisions. We have learned that change is messy, contested, and unpredictable. The English Reformation wasn't a smooth transition from Catholic to Protestant, but a chaotic process: forward under Henry VIII, radically forward under Edward VI, backward under Mary I, then moderately forward under Elizabeth I. People improvised, adapted, resisted, and complied in response to changing circumstances. We have learned that historical figures are complex. Henry VIII was cultured and cruel, intelligent and irrational, charming and terrifying. Anne Boleyn was ambitious and witty, but probably innocent of the crimes that killed her. Thomas More was a brilliant humanist who championed reason yet approved burning heretics. Mary I was pious and dutiful but earned Bloody Mary through persecution. These people were neither heroes nor villains, but humans with contradictory qualities. We have learned that historical change has costs. The Protestant Reformation liberated England from papal authority, but destroyed monasteries, libraries, and charitable institutions. It created the Church of England, but also created religious divisions and persecution. It enriched the gentry but displaced peasants. Progress, if we call it, that came at a terrible price for many. We have learned that culture flourishes in unexpected circumstances. The same courts that produced executions also produced magnificent music, poetry, and art. Holbein painted at Henry's court while More and Cromwell went to the scaffold. Tallis composed beautiful music for both Catholic and Protestant services. Renaissance culture coexisted with political brutality. We have learned that women navigated patriarchal societies with varying success. Catherine of Aragon maintained dignity despite rejection. Anne Boleyn almost succeeded in power politics, but was destroyed. Jane Seymour gave Henry his son but died in the process. Anne of Cleves survived through wisdom. Catherine Howard was destroyed by youth and indiscretion. Catherine Parr survived through intelligence. Mary I and Elizabeth I ruled as queens, demonstrating women's capacity while facing unique challenges. The Tudor achievement. What did the Tudors accomplish? They created the Church of England, an institution that persists to the present, influencing millions globally through the Anglican Communion. They centralized royal power, creating more effective government and laying foundations for the modern state, while simultaneously strengthening Parliament in ways that would eventually limit monarchy. They transformed English society, redistributing land, creating a new gentry class, transforming the economy toward capitalism, and disrupting medieval social structures. They established England as a major power, defeating the Spanish Armada, beginning colonial expansion, and creating national confidence and identity. They presided over cultural flowering. The English language enriched, literature revolutionized, groundwork for Shakespeare, music developed, architecture innovated, and education expanded. But they also executed thousands for treason, heresy, and political opposition, including 2 queens, numerous nobles, clergy, and commoners. Destroyed cultural heritage, burning libraries, smashing art, demolishing monasteries, and erasing much of medieval religious culture. Created religious divisions that would lead to ongoing conflict, persecution, and even civil war in the next century. Displaced and impoverished many through enclosures, economic changes, and dissolution of charitable institutions that had provided social welfare. The Tudor legacy is thus neither purely glorious nor purely shameful, but deeply ambiguous. Extraordinary achievements achieved through brutal means, progress accompanied by destruction, cultural creation alongside cultural obliteration. The enduring questions. The Tudor period raises questions that remain relevant about power. How much should rulers have? What limits should exist? How do we balance strong government with individual liberty? The Tudors claimed near absolute authority, but also worked with Parliament. These tensions, unresolved, would lead to later conflicts and eventual constitutional monarchy. About religion. How do religious convictions relate to political authority? Should religion be enforced by the state? How do we handle religious diversity? The Tudor period's religious conflicts led eventually, after much suffering, to religious toleration, but the relationship between faith and politics remains contested. About change. How do societies transform? What costs are acceptable? Who bears those costs? The Tudor transformation was revolutionary but extremely costly for many. These questions about the price of progress remain urgent. About gender. How do women exercise power in patriarchal societies? What constraints limit them? How do exceptional women transcend limitations? The Tudor queen's experiences illuminate both possibilities and persistent obstacles. About violence. When is state violence justified? How much brutality is acceptable in pursuit of political or religious goals? The Tudor period's executions and persecutions force us to confront these uncomfortable questions. About culture. How does artistic and intellectual achievement relate to political circumstances? Can creativity flourish under oppression? The Tudor cultural flowering, despite, or because of, political turbulence, suggests complex relationships between art and power. The fascination endures. Why do we remain obsessed with the Tudors 5 centuries later? The soap opera appeal, Henry's 6 marriages, Anne Boleyn's execution, court intrigues, Elizabeth's virginity. These stories are inherently dramatic. The familiar strangeness. Tudor England is close enough to understand they spoke English, left abundant records, shaped our world, yet different enough to fascinate. They burned heretics, executed queens, believed in witches. The personalities. Henry VIII is one of history's most recognizable figures. Elizabeth I is iconic. Anne Boleyn fascinates. Thomas More inspires and disturbs. These are compelling characters. The stakes: religious truth, political survival, dynastic succession. These weren't abstract but matters of life and death. The intensity is compelling. The mystery, despite abundant sources, questions remain. Was Anne Boleyn guilty? Why didn't Elizabeth marry? What really drove Henry? Historical detective work is endlessly engaging. The relevance. The Tudor period shaped the modern world. Understanding it helps us understand ourselves politically, religiously, culturally. The accessibility. We can visit Tower of London, Hampton Court, and other sites. We can see portraits, read documents, and experience physical connections to this past. Popular culture novels Hilary Mantel's Cromwell trilogy, TV shows The Tudors, films, and documentaries keep the period alive in public consciousness. The final word. As you drift towards sleep, carrying with you images from our long journey, the young, athletic Henry VIII jousting in the tilt-yard, Anne Boleyn walking to the scaffold with dignity, Thomas More joking with his executioner, Catherine of Aragon dying alone, Edward Vichy feverishly writing about theology, Mary I weeping over another false pregnancy, Elizabeth I rallying her troops at Tilbury, Cranmer holding his hand in the flames, and countless others who populated this extraordinary era reflect on this. The Tudor period was a hinge of history. The medieval world gave way to the early modern, Catholic England became Protestant, royal power increased, yet also sowed seeds of its own limitation, English culture flourished, and the foundations of the modern world were laid. It was an age of giants both in achievement and in cruelty, in cultural creation and in destruction, in courage and in cowardice. The Tudors were neither the romantic heroes of popular mythology nor the simple villains of their enemies' propaganda. They were humans brilliant and foolish, brave and cruel, visionary and blind, capable of creating cultural masterpieces and ordering horrific executions, sometimes the same people on the same days. Their world is gone, the magnificent palaces are museums or ruins, the religious conflicts they fought are historical curiosities to many, the political questions they grappled with have been answered or transformed. Yet their legacy persists in the Church of England, in English political traditions, in the language enriched by Tudor writers and the Bible, in the cultural achievements they patronized, and in the very fact that we still care about them 5 centuries later. Tomorrow, you might visit a Tudor building, hear Tudor music in a church, read Shakespeare whose career began in Elizabeth's reign, or encounter any of the countless ways Tudor England shaped the world we inherit. You'll know that behind the romantic stories and dramatic histories lies a complex, ambiguous, endlessly fascinating reality, a world of power and passion, of faith and doubt, of creation and destruction, of human beings navigating impossible circumstances and sometimes transcending them, sometimes succumbing to them, always fully, fallibly, remarkably human. Sleep peacefully, knowing that history is not simple or one-dimensional but rich, complex, and endlessly rewarding for those willing to explore it with honesty, empathy, and intellectual rigor. The Tudor rose, that symbol uniting the red rose of Lancaster and the white rose of York, represents not just a dynasty but an entire era's contradictions, achievements, and enduring fascination. The Tower of London still stands where Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard lost their heads. Hampton Court still displays Henry's magnificence. Westminster Abbey holds the tombs of Henry VII, Elizabeth I, and Mary I. And the memory of the Tudors, for better and worse, in glory and in shame, in achievement and in atrocity, continues to captivate, instruct, and remind us that the past is never truly past, but always present, shaping who we are and how we understand ourselves.